Good evening. Do you believe in ghosts?
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! In the name of God!
A full moon. A spooky, deserted mansion. Halloween night.
All right, dude! That's...
Who's buried in Lydia? Ain't nothing but dead folk.
Somewhere, hidden from sight, closer than you might think, is a place that's not on any map. It looks a lot like hell, but they call it home.
There goes the neighborhood.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare, from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on, and invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature grindhouse style where we discuss two films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise, and at the end of each episode, along with our honorary Sleazoids, which you can become by subscribing on Patreon.
Only some of you may know what I'm referencing here, but Terry is back. The vibes are going to be happening next week. He's slicing and dicing. Join the sleaze. Thank you.
Absolutely. We decide on all the official ratings and rankings for every film that we cover. Patreon subscribers also get an on-air shout-out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we are in our approaching, I think, 5 years of 120, 130 plus bonus episodes, as well as our bonus transmission series, which we've done like 30 or 40 of, where we talk about new release genre films, which we are eyeing doing a nothing but horror spooky bonus transmission because there's enough horror movies coming out this month that we can do it. So again, if you haven't made the jump, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast, and we will give the shout outs here. Speaking of which, so we had 2 people sign up for the $10 a month rate, which was Jackson Littlewood and Aaron Keskin, who are going to be joining us for the virtual screening that we usually do on the last Thursday of every month. And we've been having a lot of people sign up and join us. And for the Halloween one, it's worth noting, we're actually going to be doing it on the Friday, the 28th, I believe. And we are going to be doing a double feature. So we are going to be doing one, a free one for all of our listeners. Anyone can join in, and then the follow-up is going to be a bonus exclusive just for our new virtual signups that we have here at $10 a month. So
yeah,
thanks to those 2 for signing up and joining us for that. We also had Amber sign up at $5 a month, and we had Max Jackson sign up, and last but not least, Anson Tran sign up. So thanks so much to you folks. Hope you're enjoying all of those bonus episodes.
Yeah, thank you.
We appreciate the support. That's the one plug for the week. The other plug, as always, is Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you were listening on either one of those platforms, and I see the stats, I see you right now listening on both of those platforms, give us a good old rating and review down at the bottom. It helps us climb the ranks and find new listeners, and we appreciate that as well. And the very last plug, as always, is merch. If you like the poster art that based out of Toronto horror artist Trevor Henderson did for the show, you can get that basically put on anything that you can think of. You can get a hoodie, you can get a pen, you can get a notebook, a pillow, a poster, anything that you can think of at the link in the description, as well as over at sleazoidspodcast.com. But that is it for the intro. Welcome back to another week. As always, I am your host, Josh Lewis, and joining me also, as always, is my co-host,
Jamie Miller. Welcome back, everybody.
Welcome. I think we are in the thick of the spooky season. So 2 weeks ago would have been the last time you folks would have heard from us over on the main feed, where we would have had a special guest film writer from Film School Rejects, Anna Swanson, make her second appearance on the show and bring with her a what we deemed the 1976 Fuck Them Kids horror drama double feature of Richard Donner's The Omen, the classic, as well as a very sort of underseen and underrated sort of Spanish horror film by one Chicho Serrador called Who Can Kill a Child, which is a movie that absolutely poses a question and then answers that question for anyone interested. Yes, I haven't actually never seen a more gleeful murder of children in a final action set piece than that film. So if you have any interest in children's horror and adults having to reckon with that, over on the main feed 2 weeks ago, go check it out. But last week, we had your, over on the Patreon exclusively, we had your patron-voted double feature, which I'm sure many of you are aware of by now, but every 2 months we have the patrons do a little democratic vote on the double feature that you all want us to cover. And you guys were little freaks last week and had us do a double feature of one of the scuzziest, most lo-fi and uncomfortable pairings we've ever had to cover. Yeah. And they are very 80s serial killer movies done in this very disturbingly intimate style with just very filthy vibes to them front to back. We talked about the 1980 film Maniac, directed by William Lustig. And we paired that with the Austrian film from 1983, very notorious film, Angst, directed by Gerald Kargel. Both films have some of the nastiest murder sequences and the procedure of serial murder sequences that had existed when they came out. And yeah, I will say we absolutely needed to take a shower after that episode.
Yeah, it was absolutely disgusting. Shame on all of you. I'm just kidding, though. It was unbelievable. I love Angst so much. Maniac's great, too, but Angst is just one of my favorites. Yeah,
which is also just a weird expression sometimes, because that movie just makes me feel terrible.
Yeah, I know, right? For me to so highly rate that thing after what it makes you feel like, it's just craziness.
Yeah, so if you want ultra sleazy serial killer movies, that was over on the Patreon feed last week. So go check that out. But moving on to this week, we have a very special returning guest joining us this week. He is the host of the wonderful Sound Tracker podcast that covers movie soundtracks that I'm sure many of our listeners are familiar with. And he hasn't been on the show in quite a little while, but he's making a glorious return.
Yes.
That guest is Eric Peacock. Eric, how you doing?
I'm great, and I'm really glad to be back here because we talked about this during the episode we did that I couldn't remember the last time I was on here, and it was year one, and I cannot believe that you let me come on during year one and talk about pieces and slugs. Like, that is just one of the most amazing things in the world to me, that it was that early in the show that you were just like, yeah, whatever, come on and talk about. I actually found out recently, by the way, just as a quick aside, that I've really recently gotten into the 70s, 80s trade paperback, like those like really cool cover horror pulpy novels. The paperbacks from hell sort of books. Slugs was based on a novel, and I don't think that's something I knew until like 2 weeks ago. But man. There's source material for that movie.
That'd be interesting to read the heavy detailed paragraphs of just slugs going into people and whatever else.
I thought you were going to say it for Pieces. I was like, what could possibly be the lore behind Pieces? You know, what was happening there? But yeah, no, it's been a long time. That was definitely in our first year of the show, and we're now approaching like the 5th year of the show. So we knew we eventually had to have you on back, and especially too, because you've started your own podcast called Sound Tracker, which, as Eric just mentioned, Jamie and I, by the time that you guys are listening to this, Jamie and I would have just been on it last week, where we would have been talking Devil's Rejects by Rob Zombie, specifically because we wanted to talk about, something horror and gruesome, and that, for the month of October that Jamie and I love, but also a lot of people don't remember that Rob Zombie has really great taste in just like outlaw country and southern rock music, which is just front to back what that entire soundtrack is, despite the content of the film being much more disturbing than that. So we had a blast talking about that with Eric. So make sure to go check out his feed for us all talking about Rob Zombie. But for this week, Eric, we have the guest bring on the double feature. So what 2 films have you brought with you this week, and why did you pair these 2 together?
Night of the Demons and Nightbreed. And the reason is these are 2 that I'll never get to talk about on my own show. No, that's not the that's not the
that's
connection
why we
they have
picked
here.
The Devil's Rejects. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it's 2 movies. At the end, outside of the fact they both have night in the title, they're both horror films that delve into, and obviously it's a lot more pronounced in Nightbreed, but they sort of have this fairy tale aspect to them. Night of the Demons, I mean, Night of the Demons tries for an Alice in Wonderland thing, and really the only way that it gets it right is in the outfit. You know, she's in an Alice outfit. I know from the commentary that was something they were going for a little bit more, was a little bit of an Alice in Wonderland motif. But, you know, Nightbreed is 100%. Like, I mean, it's almost like a really weird adult fairy tale, you know, with Midian and all that. And so that would be my connection with these, is that they're two, what I think are like top-notch horror films that I am just really glad to be talking about regardless, that sort of have a fairy tale quality to them. That Nightbreed, like I said, is the one that kind of gets a little more correct, but it's enough of a connection for these to work.
Yeah, and well, they also have like a monster movie connection a little bit too, with like some of the creature effects that they're doing, and you know, so I definitely picked up on that aspect as well. And also, you know, this is our last main feed episode before Halloween, so we're just kind of getting into the Halloween vibes. And I would say Night of the Demons, if nothing else, that's what it's going for. It's literally takes place on a Halloween, the night of a Halloween party. So I do think that it's going to be a fun way to get people into the spooky season if they are still waiting for their opportunity to do so. And that being said, I think we are going to jump right into it here. Let's start off with Night of the Demons.
Night of the Demons. Party till you drop.
All right, we are talking Night of the Demons, the 1988 American supernatural horror comedy film directed by one Kevin S. Tenney and written by Joe Augustin. And these are two filmmakers we have not talked about because they do not have the, I guess, most significant careers that, you know, when I went and looked them up, I was kind of like, I don't know what some of these are. So I had to immediately delve into them and be like, how did two guys I've not heard of, you know, come out with this at a certain point in their career? And Joel Augustin, who wrote the screenplay here, he's a Philadelphia-born producer and writer, and he is apparently a very real, unequivocal believer in paranormal research. And he genuinely, in his own personal life, just advocates for scientific investigations into the spiritual realm. And so when I heard that, I was like, okay, this screenplay coming for him kind of makes sense. And he genuinely apparently thinks that, you know, if we learned more about this, that it would bring about world peace. And he has written books and articles about this.
That's amazing. I love
so
that.
he wrote a script called Halloween Party, which is, and we were just mentioning with Eric before we started recording here that, yeah, like it was, speaking of getting us into the Halloween party vibes, here's a film that was literally at one point going to be called Halloween Party. And he got the interest of this Kevin Tenney, whose biggest claim to fame seems to be this film from 1986 called Witchboard. Eric, have you seen this film, Witchboard?
Okay, one of the things I was going to bring up is that I actually really like Kevin Tenney as a director. Like Witchboard 1 and 2 and Witch Trap are like all pretty awesome, like 80s movies.
Okay.
Sweet.
Yeah, I might need to watch up.
Strong recommend. And then he had
How many of them have this same premise? Because I was reading the log lines for a lot of them, and I was like, so many of them are like Ouija boards, seances.
Demons are coming into the house, yeah.
So Witchboard 1 and 2 are obviously, there's a third Witchboard even, but Witchboard 1 and 2, I don't think he had anything to do with the third one, but Witchboard 1 and 2 are obviously like direct sequels. And Witch Trap is like a spin-off that involves the like villain from Witchboard 1 and 2.
He had a whole franchise going.
Yeah, it was like a franchise. Now, beyond that, his 90s didn't look so great. Like he had a movie called The Cellar that's all right, and Pinocchio's Revenge, which is kind of like a fun, shitty movie. But he started off very promising between Witchboard 1 and 2 and Witch Trap and this movie. Like 4 very solid movies that just, you know, didn't adjust to the 90s well once that time came.
Yeah, well, these two seem like a very interesting pairing because, I mean, at the time that this came out, On release, this ended up being quite a box office hit for them. They had a $1 million budget, and I think it ended up grossing over $3 million. But basically, everyone was like, "Wow, this is one of the most cliche movies I've just ever seen in my life." People were like, "This is just in a cool way." You can kind of feel that it's doing a little bit of trying to parody some horror stuff, but at the same time, it's also just very lovingly blending so many different things together. Like, you have some elements of the possession film, you have some elements of the slasher film, you have some elements at a certain point of like zombie and monster films kind of going on, and people got enough of the vibes out of this one. They ended up making 2 sequels to this and even doing a remake of this film.
Yeah.
So this film clearly has an audience. Now, for you, Eric, was this like a VHS staple? Was this like a fun one to put on? Like, what was your relationship to this one?
Oh yeah, this was being born in 1980. Like, I was forged in the fire of Gilbert Gottfried's USA Up All Night, and this was absolutely like a VHS rental, a USA Up All Night staple. And it's one that I've owned on both DVD, and I bought the like Shout Factory Blu-ray. They ended up double dipping on that one and doing a 4K, but I did not break down and buy that because I've broken myself of that habit, because the Blu-ray that I have looks great. But no, this is one of those ones that, Halloween is my favorite time of year. As I'm sitting here talking to you, I am like literally surrounded by Halloween decorations and like everything. It's just like my favorite time of year. And this movie, it's one that I think, without even trying, just distills like that Halloween feeling. Despite being at a Halloween party, like it really is like a monster film, but it really nails the essence of like Halloween fun. And it's one of those, it's a staple for me every year in October. I watch Night of the Demons or even part 2, which is not bad.
Nice. Yeah, I did hear that part 2 was actually pretty good as well. Yeah, this poster has been in my brain for a long time. I've talked about it on the show a couple times, but there was a video movie shop in my hometown Chatham, and I would just go down the VHS horror section and just look at everything, because all of the posters were always so violent and crazy, and I was always just like, what's inside that, And this was one of them, so it was cool to finally see what it was, instead of just imagining this entire time.
Yeah, see this movie that is at once incredibly corny, incredibly horny, and gross, all at once. It's a teen Halloween party movie that basically turns into a demon body horror thing, and also includes like lots of very silly, almost like Scooby-Doo shenanigans of like wandering the house and getting locked in lost rooms. And it has this very sort of juvenile, anarchic kind of quality to the way that the kids kind of talk to each other and just say nasty things to one another.
Yeah, it feels like nobody likes each other at all. Like the couples kind of like each other and they want to have sex. But even then, the relationships are strained.
Yeah.
The only one is and I can't remember the title, but they're dressed as the girls, I think, in a green outfit, and the guy's a doctor, and their relationship seems kind of okay, but the other ones and the way that they interact are just it's like they hate each other, and I found that to be kind of funny after a certain point.
Mm-hmm.
A little strange at first, because you're like, why are you guys hanging out?
Yeah.
All Stooge does is call his girlfriend a bitch not even his girlfriend, just like that girl that he's with. The entire movie, he's like, bitch, like every 5 seconds.
Yeah, he's like, take the wheel, bitch, or he's just like, making fun of her, and she's like crying, and he's just like, go home.
Yeah, it's very dysfunctional, incredibly.
Yeah, these are. I mean, I was reading up a lot of, because I have a lot of friends who have seen this one. I was kind of going through people's logs to kind of gauge how people felt about this one, and there was a lot of people being like, "Man, this is one of those ones where there's just a lot of unpleasant people that you get to watch die."
Yes.
That's definitely part of the fun there. But I do like the little animated sort of graphic design intro that it has, where it's this
pure classic
just to pick
Halloween vibes.
Yeah, like very spooky, stormy night, and there's the hill on the mountainside, and demons flying around, and the jack-o'-lanterns, and the creepy staircases, and everything. It's a good little introduction.
Yeah, absolutely. It does kind of set the tone. I mean, the thing, as we said, it gets really, like, the language is pretty bad. Like, they're swearing at each other constantly. There is sex. There's a lot of violence. But it somehow does give this I think it's because of how juvenile the dialogue is. It still does give this kind of like classic Halloween feel, even though it really dives into the genre stuff and the really gross stuff as well. But they definitely talk like they're 15, 16 years old, you know? So I think that helps.
Well, one of the things I always think about this movie is it almost feels like, and you brought up a good point, it being completely unpleasant characters. In Return of the Living Dead, it's almost like if you were watching just the punk character, because there's like a punk sensibility to this too, that I feel like it almost feels like it would pair well with Return of the Living Dead. Absolutely, because
also Linnea Quigley, correct?
Yeah, right. Yeah, you've got her in there, and it's like if Return of the Living Dead didn't have any characters but the punk kids in it, like that's what you're spending time with. You know, it's like unlikable people mostly that don't really get along and bicker and do shitty things and then die.
Yeah, they even start like the punk vibes are right off the bat. Like as soon as it transforms from the cartoon to the live action, it goes into them like driving across the neighborhood and like just skirting around and showing their asses and
in a hilarious Halloween themed car.
Yeah, it's got like a pumpkin on the rooftop or something like that.
Stooge is driving around with an appropriate like pig's mask on, which by the way, he's played by Hal Havens, who we last mentioned. He was in Sorority Babes and the Slime Ball Bowl-O-Rama. So I was like, awesome. Damn, which was also with Linnea Quigley. So I was like, damn, like she's popping up everywhere. She's a bit of a Sleazoids legend at this point because she was also in like we've covered Silent Night, Deadly Night that she's in, Savage Streets, like Dead Heat. She was just in The Guyver, which we just covered a couple weeks ago.
She's in so much. It's kind of wild.
Yeah, she was, she had a really big thing, which by the way, apparently part of the reason that she's in so much of this stuff, and I mean, not because this is how she got the role, but partially because she was collaborating with her husband, who is a special effects artist by the name of Steve Johnson, who did all of the pretty well done effects work for this film and was someone who worked with, as far as I could tell, Screaming Mad George and Steve Wang. He did a little bit of work on The Predator. He did a little bit of work on some of the Nightmare on Elm Street sequels. And he met Linnea Quigley, I believe, in the making of this film, because he had to make her fake breast mold for the nipples scene, which we will get to. So true romance was flying. Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I mean, her transformation is one of the big memorable things in this film. Like when she starts to have her face kind of stretched out when she's looking at herself in the mirror and all of that. Like even before they just place the makeup right on her and she becomes the full demon, they have some really cool like stretch makeup or I don't know, animatronics of some kind on her face that are pretty impressive. So yeah, it's the transformations to the demons once it gets to it is a lot of fun to watch.
I was surprised it took kind of like 45 minutes to get to the demons.
Yeah, I was too. There is a lot of them just kind of setting up.
It's a teen hangout movie.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And not with people you like spending time with. Like, actually, I really love Saul's character arc in this. Like, he is like the guy you think is going to be the one that, like, from the beginning, he's got that, like, that Brooklyn accent, and he's like a shithead to everybody. But like he's kind of the one that you're rooting for by the end a little bit,
Yeah, I was surprised at that because I was calling him Rat Boy the whole time because of the first thing that he does to the old man when we're introduced to him. I think that's the character you're talking about, right? With the black hair, yeah. And I think he like runs over to the old guy and puts like a dead rat in his face. And speaking of that old guy. I do really like that and we'll get to it completely by the end, but that they have this setup that's just very simple with this old man, and then they don't mention it whatsoever until the very end as this kind of like one exclamation point of
the
Halloween.
Longest setup and payoff gore gag that you've ever seen in a movie. It takes about like 80 minutes or so. But yeah, there's just like an old guy who just like hates all the kids who are riding around because, and to be fair to him, the kids are fucking chaotic. Like the way that they're driving around and just like breaking shit and like playing pranks on people. And like when the one guy tries to almost scares him to death with the rat. He goes, "Careful, Pops, you're gonna blow your pacemaker."
Yeah. These kids are just out for blood, basically.
So he's like, these damn rotten kids are gonna get what they deserve. Meanwhile, he's dropped his grocery bag, which it is revealed he's carrying apples and razor blades from the store. And I was like, question mark?
Yeah.
It was in my notes. I was like, well, okay, this old guy wants to kill some kids. That's how fed up he is with all these unpleasant teenagers, which you do understand on some level.
Yeah. The thing I love so much about that setup is that it's like Chekhov's razor apples, and like as many times as I've seen this movie, and as much as it's such a funny, when we get to it, it is such a funny payoff for this like gag that they do. Again, like you said, it is shown at the beginning and it's not mentioned again, and it's so well done that like I almost forget that it's something that happens until the movie opens with that old guy, and I'm like, oh fuck, that's right. This is how it ends. Like,
yeah, 100%. I just wasn't even sure when it got to that point why we were on the old guy again, and then I remembered everything as soon as it was too late. We'll get to the details, but yeah, I did think that was quite funny, and I enjoyed that the long gag.
Yeah, and the basic setup for a lot of this is that a lot of these kids, they're about to have a party. It follows mostly Judy and Jay, who are kind of like the main central couple, the two young high schoolers who are abandoning their Halloween plans to go to a school dance. And instead, they are going to go to the party at the former funeral parlor called Hull House, where the owner apparently used to fuck corpses, and there was a big old blood and guts massacre that took place there. And all these kids are like, man, it seems like the greatest spot for us to just go hang out there and get lost in there, and hopefully nothing spooky happens in this crematorium, and we don't also try to do a seance that then summons demons that live inside the crematorium. But it's funny, in these early sequences, the dialogue and the performances are very, very exaggerated, is what I'll say. And in the early goings, I was like, how much of this is like it's doing a bit? Like some of it was like so cornball, and or they were so like. As soon as they got to some of the line deliveries, I was like, okay, they have to be leaning into that being hilarious. Because the brother pops out of the closet and is like, wow, bodacious boobies, sis. And I was like, okay.
And he's a little shit.
Yeah,
like, in other scenes too. Like, and he's only in, I think, the beginning, but he kind of goes with the rest of the characters, where it's just like everybody except for maybe the lead and one other are just complete assholes. Yeah, that little brother is just such a little shithead. It's hilarious.
Well, even Sal, the way he's delivering the lines, because he's the one who gets to talk with the brother, right? And he's just like, "Come on, why don't you spill the beans there? Here's a nice chunk of change that'll loosen your lips a little." And just like the way that something. Yeah.
25 cents.
Yeah, he's like, are you kidding? Betray my beloved sister for a measly quarter? What do you think this is, the Depression? Like, the lines are just like so silly, but in like a way that is like, like at a certain point, I was definitely like, okay, this is what it's going for. I'm like, shit, the brother, what's the other thing the brother says about the girl that's weird too? Oh, he's like, are you dating her for her personality or her big cha-chas?
Yeah, all he does is talk shit to Jay the whole time Jay's there too. Like he just he just needles him.
Yeah, he talks shit and talks about his sister's boobs like way too much. Yeah, people like some of the lines are pretty funny in this. Like they and that's I'm right there with you. It's kind of when I started getting on its wavelength a little more, because I'm like, okay, I think it's trying to be more parody, and then it obviously takes the genre elements seriously and has fun with them and commits to them, but the dialogue is just so over the top that it has to be funny. Like, I found it in my mother's closet. She used to be an acid head. Or what was the one that it's about partying, and he's just like, oh, eat a bowl of fuck. I came here to party. Yeah. Oh my god, eat a bowl of fuck is one of the best things I've ever heard.
Yeah, I love Stooge. I love Stooge for all of and he is cranked to. It goes beyond 11. He plays everything at like 12. I mean, he is yelling.
He's a monster.
I read that he took a lot of inspiration from Belushi for his the way he played this character, whether or not it comes through or not. But that was his inspiration was Belushi's performances when he would play that real manic
Nice.
Yeah. Well, and also the movie is very cartoonishly gratuitous as well. Like, like having Judy, you know, she's talking to Jay on the phone, talking about how they're switching up their plans, and she's like bending over the mirror and stripping in front of her brother in the closet. And then the opening shot for Linnea Quigley is also her bent over at a convenience store, distracting the cashiers.
Yeah, you don't even see her face for like the first 30 seconds. It's just her butt.
Yeah, those two guys just chomping his gum loudly as they walk. I love that they're just so stoked that she's standing there like that the whole time.
Yeah. I will say there is some really cool camera movements in this that I was surprised by. Like I like the pan that they do across the aisles when there's so many names I forget, but it's the girl in the black dress who becomes the demon initially.
Angela.
And she
only I remember because I thought her and Linnea Quigley, I think when they get to go demon mode, I think they are probably delivering the best performances in the movie. Like they are having a blast.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mode. Goblin mode, I guess we would call it now.
Yeah. And I like the camera as they're doing this kind of plan to get a bunch of supplies for the party for free and basically stealing. The camera kind of pans between the aisles and follows Angela, and then they meet up. She meets up with Suzanne, who they find out she's bending over to distract the cashiers.
Yeah, we kind of see what their strategy is, right, over the course of the shot.
Yeah, and even once they get to the house, there is a lot of cool like slow zoom outs down the hallway, for instance, when they're looking down like a long dark hallway. Or there's even a couple moments where Judy is really stressed out and she's kind of like she's sitting down, kind of curled up in a ball, and the camera goes up above her. And there's just there are a couple moments that I was surprised by, or when Angela does the that kind of dance sequence a little bit. There's some cool camera work there. So yeah, it's not. I was surprised by some of its technical ability, just because I was expecting it to be just straight up like. Yeah,
looking at the cinematographer's other credits, I was definitely surprised because it's shot by a guy named David Lewis, and his other films are, I'll list them out here: Leprechaun 3 and 4,
right? Yeah.
Hills Have Eyes 2, Children of the Corn 5,
hell yeah,
and then every single Mary Kate and Ashley Olsen movie from the 2000s, basically.
I'll tell you the shot that I'm always I just love in this movie is when they're all looking in the broken mirror.
Oh yeah,
that's
I almost forgot
awesome.
About that one. Yeah, it's great because they have it like the mirror shatters and each person has like their own individual shard. It is a really cool shot. It's very memorable, and they have some cool stuff with the gore, especially when it comes into play. Like they almost like overdo the blood when some, like for instance when the piggy guy he gets his tongue bit off by Angela when she turns into a demon, and there's just like an appalling amount of blood spraying out of his mouth and all of that. So I did really appreciate how much they gored it up.
Well, you get a really good eye gouging too.
Oh yeah,
a fantastic eye gouging. Linnea Quigley had to come in and learn how to do eye gouging for this movie, by the way. That's another funny thing that I had read when I was looking at background on this, is that she had to come in and like practice gouging eyes out of a fake head to make it look right.
Oh my God. That'd be a fun day.
Yeah. Yeah, well, because it's kind of cool, like where like all of these kids, they've set up how unpleasant they are and how much they don't really get along with each other, but that they all want to have just like a night of partying. They want to let loose. They want to get into their costumes. And when they get to Hull House in the early goings, I was reminded a bit of that film that Trevor Henderson actually brought on the podcast for our spooky season last year, where we talked about the Midnight Hour. I don't know if you remember that one, Jamie, which was very similar sort of party, high school Halloween party, that then all of a sudden the party goes wrong and monsters start arising and things like vampires and ghouls and zombies. And I mean, there's even, that one has a bit more of a lighthearted touch to it. It's not as mean-spirited as this film is.
In it. And I guess this one technically does with the dance, but the musical number in that one is more like what you'd see on like a Disney Channel or something like that.
Yeah, well, and when the zombies start coming to life at the party, like no one recognizes, and the zombies just kind of like want to have a fun time and like hang out with them, and they literally just don't even realize that they're zombies like drinking the punch bowl and stuff like that.
The ghouls just wanted to party and get wasted. I like that a lot.
But it has
That
a lot of
movie's-
the same like spooky candlelight and cobwebs and candy spreads and, you know, just the kids partying and hanging out until the radio dies and they go, well, there's no more music. So it's time to play the classic party game, Let's Summon a Demon. And I love that they, you know, there even is like one kid who, same with sorority babes, because the premise of that I always laugh at, where it's just like, all the kids agree that they're going to get a wish from like the trophy bowling alley goblin who comes to life, and the one kid goes, well, maybe we shouldn't do the wishes. You know, sometimes I've heard you do wishes and the wishes go bad. And they're like, shut up. What are you talking about? And with this one, it's the same thing. They're just like, you know, I've messed around with this a little bit before. I think the one guy's like, you know, my daddy was a preacher and I know better than to be in here fooling with this stuff. This is a house of the dead and I'm getting out of here before it's too late. But they're like, no. We are going to summon some demons, and the demon is what breaks the mirror, because during the seance that they're giving, I think it's a Stooges girl, Helen, who he just constantly is abusive towards. She sees a demon killing her in the mirror and screams, and it breaks it. And Stooge is just yelling like, you can't take this bitch anywhere. She's just like flipped out. And the camera work does, I think, in the second half, because when they reveal, because the first half is really, again, it's really just teens being nasty to each other. It's a hangout movie, but no one likes hanging out with one another. They're all just kind of like poking at each other. And it totally shifts when the demon gets unleashed and you get like these POV sort of like Evil Dead tracking shots of it like moving around the house, like looking for someone to possess. And you do get like some pretty cool maneuvers where the camera actually starts like doing this wide angle, like kind of close-ups on each one, being like, who can take me? And so there's stupid jokes in it, like one guy that when the camera gets close to him because the demon's getting close to him, he's like, oh man, who cut the cheese? Something stinks in here, you know? And
they also do that, it's like that 70s show camera move when they're in the circle,
right?
And they just kind of spin in the middle. I can't, I think that's when they're deciding what to do next, if I'm not mistaken. But it's there's some cool little camera movements in there, and I do really like you were saying, Josh, the demon part, that he basically just, once he's unleashed from the furnace, it goes through the entire house in POV, and it's very much like him sprinting the entire time. And I did like that. It had that kind of, I guess, Evil Dead effect a little bit.
Well, and I also like when it finally lands in Linnea Quigley, and like it's that, like, again, the camera work where it's like up close and it pulls out and she's like, and then she immediately changes tone to like, she's great. Like, I honestly, probably, you were talking about her earlier, I probably have seen more movies with her than any other actor or actress in history.
This point.
And she's just so good, and like she's so good at that like menace that, you know, like there's like, she turns into like sort of a blank slate a little bit, you know, but there's like that underlying menace to the way she's like, you know, her voice gets even, like she kind of deepens her voice a little bit. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
It's great how that lands, and she's the perfect one to be like the first one to turn.
Yeah, totally. And then she's starting, like, they have a lot of the that kind of teen sex drama stuff in it, where like the two leads, for instance,
so there's a lot of horny teens getting lost and locked in rooms in this second half.
And it's basically like with Linnea, I think she seduces both the big guy. I think, what's her line? She says something like, "I'm in the mood for pork tonight," or something like that, which is just hilarious. And then, of course, she tries to, and successfully does, have sex with the Judy's boyfriend, because they're kind of having that whole, like, you know, he's the good guy until they try to have sex, and then she's like, I don't want to do that, and he's like, well, you've had sex with other guys, so you know, just do it with me. That whole teen drama kind of thing. But they use it to a fun effect when it gets to him and Linnea. So I did overall enjoy it, even though it is very stooped in like the cliches that we're very aware of in this genre, and I guess like the teenage stuff.
Yeah, it's helped a bit by taking that to the kind of body horror extremes that it's trying to do. Like when Quigley is getting all splotchy and stretchy, and there is that really bizarre moment that I've never seen in a movie before where she just shoves her lipstick into her nipple and it just disappears.
Wild. Yeah, and it's a good effect because, like, you know, like we said, I guess the guy fell in love when he was doing that makeup, and and I gotta say, like, it looked very real, actually. So yeah, it was a good effect. I've never seen that definitely in a movie before.
And it's such a weird choice. Like, it's one of those ones that, like, every time I watch it, I'm like, I'm not really sure what the thought process here was, but it's cool. Like, it's really neat. Like, it's just one of those things that, like, we're going to shove a stick of lipstick into this character's nipple, and like we have because we can.
Yeah, exactly. We've got the makeup artist to pull it off.
Exactly. Yeah. So for me, when it got to the second half, there was a little bit too much of kids just like wandering these rooms and just kind of like being irritating, and you know what you kind of waiting for them like the monster to eventually kind of like find and brutally kill them. And because for me it wasn't the monster stuff just wasn't really tethered much to any kind of like narrative or psychology or necessarily kind of like mood to it. So I spent a lot of that section waiting for the kids to, as we see eventually, get naked and then die brutally. Like that's where the slasher element comes in. Like even the nice kids, they just decide that they're going to get super horny and have sex inside of a coffin. And I was like, oh, so while she's riding him in the coffin, of course, Stooge has to come up and, you know, dismember the one and stomp them to death with the coffin and everything. Right. So because I saw some comparisons before watching it to like stuff like Evil Dead, and I was like, man, this doesn't quite have that nonsensical anarchy to it. The material is much closer to, I don't know, if I had to think of other films, like I guess like Chopping Mall or like Night of the Creeps, maybe a little bit. You could say of like Demons, the Bava, but I will say I do a lot of the goop and gore by the VFX artist Steve Johnson here, and the synth score really I will say too by Dennis Michael Tenney, who I didn't look this up, but I'm gonna guess he's Kevin's brother, the director, because he did most of his movies as well as like a bunch of like other soundtrack work, including like mixing and sound effects for other films like the Surf and Turf song from Steve Wang's direct-to-video action banger Drive from 1997, which by the way, which we just watched with our patrons live last month at the virtual screening. And I was like, damn, look at these connections. It's because the music is cool. And I think that the effects and the music really carried it through the second half because and you know, as Jamie mentioned too, there was some like technically accomplished sequencing. One of my favorite scenes was the one that Jamie mentioned, which was just Angela doing her little seductive dance in front of the fireplace to Bauhaus's Stigmata Martyr, and doing like a full 360-degree shot of her making out with Stooge with the fireplace in the background before biting his tongue off and having the blood gush everywhere.
And it's cool too because the camera kind of gets closer and closer to them as it circles, and it gets faster and faster until the demon transformation kind of fully takes place, or at least is unveiled to Stooge. So yeah, I thought that was really cool.
Well, and it does that too. Like this is where Saul's watching this and he's like, you know, he immediately pieces out because he realizes that something weird is going on. And I love that Stooge just fucking falls for it immediately. Like it works so hard on him. He just comes down and he's like, yeah, let's make out.
Yeah, he's
there's
ready
obviously
to go.
something wrong. Something wrong here.
Yeah, there's something there are moments of when they use more of like the supernatural elements that I did enjoy, like when the one guy gets his arm severed. Judy finds it eventually in the same room, of course, and it kind of like grabs onto her and tries to, you know, pull on her and everything like that, just totally detached from the body. I do wish that there were a little bit more of those elements because I think like what Josh was saying, that most of it is more so like slasher stuff, which I was just I mean it's effective and it's good. It's just I wasn't expecting that from like demons attacking people, I guess, for a lot of it, because I think even the kill that happens with the boyfriend and girlfriend in the coffin, besides the severed arm part, is just like he I think he just snaps her neck. Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Not before, of course, us finally seeing her breasts, of course, which makes it even the slasher connection just even more. I was like, okay, that's like a Friday the 13th moment.
Yeah, definitely. Without the double impalement. Yeah, it's very Friday the 13th.
One part that just jumping back real quick too, one part we were talking about the part with Jay and Suzanne having sex. I think she's really the part where she's like, I always put myself in the situation where, like, if you were having sex with somebody, all of a sudden they were like, "Don't look at me." You like how you would react. Yeah. Like it's creepy. Like it builds up to that very well. All of a sudden it's like something's very wrong here when she's like, "Don't look at me." Obviously,
she's got like pus boils all over her face.
All of a sudden, yes, yeah, it's very well done. But Max, I think his name's Max, and I can't remember the girlfriend's name that get killed in I think their deaths are one of those ones that they're weak. It's very slasher material, like a neck breaking and then getting his arm severed by the coffin lid is below. Because I think there's some creative deaths in this movie, but that's not one of them. And it does feel, I'll give you that. It feels like you're watching a slasher film at that point.
Yeah,
like the Linnea Quigley one is like she's having a blast in the I think the performance helps too. Like she's clearly having a blast in the monster makeup and just like terror. Even when she gets to run around and terrorize Judy, and she's like, "Run, Judy, run!" And just getting a little bit more animated with her performance, or actually maybe not even that much more animated. She's pretty animated with the opening line where she's talking about the guys having sour balls, and she's like, "It's because you guys don't get blowjobs or whatever." I can't remember exactly what it is, but she's but she's definitely like she feels like she's the one who's really leaning into what the movie is, and so it's a good match for her to get the best transformation sequences that are taking place.
Yeah, and I do like the way they show like the aftermath of bodies. Like the one with Helen, I thought was legitimately pretty gruesome, where her body just kind of like falls onto the windshield when Roger's in the car hiding away, and there's just a big like splat of blood in her face just right on the glass, and they don't hold back from that. So I do like a lot of the like aftermath of people discovering the bodies afterwards. It is rather gruesome, and I did enjoy that.
One of my favorite parts of this is that there's very little I guess like narrative reason or like narrative sense to it. So much so that by the time they get around to finally having to explain what happens, there's like no reason for them to come to the conclusions that they've come to. Really, it's a very funny sequence where there's like a rooftop set piece where Sal gets hurled off by the roof by Angela and gets like impaled below, which she does get a funny line about, where she's like, he decided to stick around, I guess.
And then it shows the gravestone, and it says like died tonight or something like that.
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty funny.
And Judy and Roger are the last two who have like not been brutally murdered or, like demonized, like turned into demons.
Yeah.
And they try hiding out in the crematorium, and Judy is finally like, you know what? This is all happening, I bet, because it's Halloween. They can't go to hell tonight, right? This is a special night of evil or something. Isn't that what Halloween is? Yeah, I bet that's why this is happening. And I was like, this is such a funny thing to include. It's just like, about like an hour and 15 minutes into the movie, they're like, I guess so. I guess that's the premise of the movie. She's saying it.
She's just kind of I don't think she finds any like artifact or anything that clues her in or anything like that. She's just kind of like, well, it's Halloween and the sun's coming up, so maybe that's when it will end. And
and someone I think said like a quote earlier or something that she cites where she's just like, I think it was Roger or something who was talking about his religious upbringing or something like that.
Okay, yeah.
We need to talk more about Roger, because Roger might be the smartest character in the movie, even though he's a huge coward. Like, he knows immediately, like, I'm getting out of this place.
Yeah, totally.
Yes.
I like, that's his concern. Like, and like the part of the crematorium is very funny, because when that's going on, she's like figuring this out. And meanwhile, he's Jeremy Davies from Saving Private Ryan in the corner. Like, he's like literally on the ground, cowering, like close to sucking his thumb. But
and she's made like a homemade flamethrower. Yeah, it's very funny.
He gets the funniest part in the movie when he's like, "They're not going to catch me," and he just leaps out of the window. Like, that is that
was the biggest laugh for me, because it was so funny. Where like,
I'm out.
Yeah, the monsters are coming in. They're like, open the door, Raj. We don't want you. We just want the bitch. You know, we don't. You know, blah, blah. And they're going off on him, and they're basically being surrounded like zombie movie style at this point. And Roger just yells that, you won't get me, and just cut to a huge stunt shot of him diving headfirst through a glass window. And I was, for some reason, that cut, it was almost like I was almost Zucker Brothers shit, man. Like I was like, what? Like this guy just was like, yep, huge stunt.
And then he's like, okay, I guess I'll just use this open window now. Oh my God.
There's some great makeup effects too when everybody's come back as demons, and my favorite one is Jay with his gouged out eyes and he's crying, but it's blood pouring out in teardrops. That's cool. That's cool. That's very inspired.
Yeah, and it is really good. Like it doesn't look. Sometimes when they do that kind of face makeup, you can kind of see the bulge a little bit of where it would be, but it actually does legitimately look like he's crying blood. It is a great effect.
I also like the what's the matter? Don't you like your blind date?
Gotta get some demon puns in there. Absolutely.
Yeah, the demons just love making puns, and they love doing body horror. That's their main qualities, and they just love coming out on Halloween. They just love having the same with the kids. It's just a party night for them.
Yeah.
And it leads into a finale where they have to like climb up some like barbed wire rope at one point.
Yeah, it's like the last challenge or something, as if the demons were like, if you can get over this barbed wire fence, then we'll let you
deserve
go.
to get away.
Yeah. Because it seems it's set up almost like rock climbing, like when you go to one of those places and it's got the colored like stones that you have to climb up to the top, but instead it's just barbed wire.
Well, and it works out so like there's two things that they need to do: survive till the day or get over that fence, because under the fence there's the underground stream and they can't cross water. But like it times up in a way that like they jump over the fence, but it doesn't matter because the sun's come up like the exact second they fly over the fence and get to the safety of the underground stream where they can't cross, the sun comes up anyway. So it's one of those things where it's like it's sort of pointless that they even climb the fence. If they could have just held their ground for another like 10 seconds instead of climbing the barbed wire, they probably would have been okay too.
Yeah, they're kind of doing like two answers at the same time there. Like, we really took care of the demons. The sun and the stream got them.
Yeah. But then they all turn to ash, and they do send the demons effectively back to hell. And they've had a wild party night. They look like they're doing the walk of shame as they head back into town after the morning sun has come up. And I do like. I love this really dark ending to it, where the old man who was berating them, or they were technically berating earlier in the film, but is now berating them for being out all night because they're a bunch of sleazeballs. But he goes back inside where his old lady has made a fresh apple pie for him to enjoy, and he bites into it and he's just like, this is some good old pie. But she's like, he thinks about it for a second. He's like, when did you have time to make pie? And she's like, well, I had to do something with all of these apples that you bought. You bought too many. And the razor blades just cut through his throat, and the blood just comes gushing out. It's such a long setup for such a huge gag and payoff, and it's a very fun way to end the movie.
Yeah, and I like the way they they do the awesome close up of the razor just straight up coming out of his throat and the blood gushing everywhere. But even before that, they do this little thing where it looks like his veins are kind of like popping out of his neck at first, like it's popping a vessel of some kind, and then it explodes out of his neck. So it's a cool little setup, great gore effect, and then you just get like a almost adorable and scarily adorable delivery from the wife, who's just like, "Happy Halloween, dear." After he's just dead after eating the pie, as if she planned it the whole time. It's very funny.
Yeah, isn't that the insinuation? Is always what I've gathered, is that she did this on purpose because he was probably a miserable old prick. You know what I mean? Like that's.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely it. Like, because at first it is kind of like she's playing the whole ignorant thing, and then she just goes up and straight up is like, "Happy Halloween," and he's already dead. I mean, blood everywhere, so she's very aware of what happened. Yeah, it's a fun gag, and once again, having it be like 80 minutes long is very funny. To not mention the old man whatsoever. They never cut back to him the entire time that they're in the house. It's just kind of this little setup and payoff at 80 minutes after the movie starts. So very funny stuff.
One thing I do want to bring up that we did not get to, and it's not that I wanted to bring up since we just talked about Rob Zombie. I saw this article and I do not remember where it was, but basically about how all of the underground shots in House of a Thousand Corpses with the chase sequence rip off the shots of Angela floating down the hallway in this movie chasing after everyone. And I went and compared, and they are like, and my rip off might be the wrong word. I guarantee Rob Zombie's probably a fan of this film. And since his whole thing is like homages, but it's very similar. Yeah, right. And it's very similar to like the shots of her from down, low angle shots of her floating in the hall and like on obviously on like a gurney or a cart of some sort. Mm-hmm. And it was this, and again, I cannot remember. It was some horror publication or something that like, it wasn't like super accusatory where it was like, he was plagiarism, but it was like, yeah, these are very similar. And there had to have been a little bit of knowledge that this was being ripped off when he did this going on. But
yeah, I could imagine that this is something that he likes. It's got that, it's just very violent. And I mean, like we were talking.
And vulgar.
Like we were talking when we were talking about The Devil's Rejects and just Zombie in general, like his dialogue is known to just have characters say the most awful, perverted, disgusting shit to each other, even if they're not the bad guys in the movie. And this has that through and through, a little bit more, on the juvenile side, but it's definitely very similar vibes in that sense.
Well, and put into the mouths, because I was like, at least with him, I find he's putting it into the mouths of characters who are horrifically obnoxious in a way that is like, well, they're mass serial killers. Yeah. With this one, it's just like general kids. It's just like teens. Like it's almost like, yeah, it feels just like it's doing like a really mean genre parody of just like teen movies around the time where they're just making them very, very explicitly nasty to one another, and which is funny because then the movie once again, half the movie is a hangout movie with these kids who feel like they intentionally don't have chemistry with one another. They're just like, they don't have fun at all together. They just want to tear each other apart, which then I guess is eventually expressed when this goes from Halloween party comedy to, like a straight up, demons, gore, gags style film.
Yeah, 100%. And I have to also mention the credit song where it's like this soft and hard 80s rock song. That very much feels more in line of like satire and stuff. And there's even a line in it where it's just like, gonna face the beast tonight, down to the last man, the beast, like that kind of shit. So I definitely think it's having a lot of fun with itself. It's not something to be taken seriously, and it dives into that over and over and over again. It's very juvenile, but in a fun way.
And that's what makes it, to me, such a fun movie. Like that's part of the reason that I love this so much, is because it's in line with like another Halloween movie that I love, like that I think really nails the essence of Halloween is Trick or Treat, the anthology.
Oh yeah.
And
I love
that's
that movie.
It's great. And now I'm not comparing. I mean, Trick or Treat, if I were ranking these, I would, as much as I love Night of the Demons, I can't argue that like there's like a huge comparison quality wise, because Trick or Treat is just incredible. But like that fun aspect of Trick or Treat, I think, is something you need for Halloween. Like a Halloween movie can't be, I don't know, because Halloween's a fun holiday. It's about celebrating scary stuff, and like there's got to have that fun aspect. So like the comedy and the fun is what makes this a yearly visit for me on Halloween, without question. Like it's the comedy works really well in this, I think.
Yeah, this is a great, I would say, like Halloween party movie for sure. Like I would put this on with like that one we talked about last year, Josh. We already mentioned The Midnight Hour, stuff like that. It's just it's more like, as violent and depraved as it can be, it's kind of like lighthearted in what it's doing in a sense. And
that's what's sort of interesting, that it feels like it should be lighthearted, but the characters don't behave like that's the kind of movie they're in, which is sort of like does create this interesting kind of contradiction when you're watching. Just like you feel like you're having like a goofy fun time with kids running around a house, Scooby-Doo style, and then all of a sudden, a naked girl who's covered in pus boils is gouging out another character's eyeballs, and you're seeing it all happen on screen, and you're just like, oh god, okay, I don't know. Ooh.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a good idea for a double. Oh, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
That's a great idea for a double feature too, because it's one I hadn't even considered. Midnight Hour is a blast, and I think because Midnight Hour is a TV movie, so to me, I don't think about like how these would pair together, because Midnight Hour is a much more innocent film than this one is.
Yeah.
But like,
Yes.
you're right though. Like they would be a good double feature. Like that would be a great pairing. They're very fun. Midnight Hour is a blast. It is a very enjoyable movie too. So
I agree.
Next year I may have to run that double feature.
Yeah, that'd be sweet. That'd be a fun one.
Yeah, no, we just need Midnight Hour to be available on 4K disc, because I think when we watched it last year, it was only available on like YouTube or something like that, and it was like not a particularly good transfer of it. But no, that would be a fun double feature. And I think if we're pivoting towards reductive rating round on this one gets a pretty decent 3 from me. I think I definitely, in the early goings, I was surprised at how much it was leaning into the exaggeratedly sort of almost satirical, corny, horny horribleness of the entire thing. Because I could see the reference points. Like I was seeing demons, I was seeing other things, other horror comedies we've talked about, like Night of the Creeps and Chopping Mall, and especially some of the mean-spirited deaths that take place in those. But I was eventually won over just by, I think, like, I do enjoy the way that it's shot. I do enjoy the synth soundtrack to it and the makeup effects. I think it's so committed, and there's so much glee in the sort of like, in the clear making of the film that I found a little bit more infectious, especially with the two performances by Amelia Kincaid and Linnea Quigley, who are playing Angela and Suzanne. They get to just have a blast when they get to turn into demons. And I mean, they're honestly having a bit of a blast before. Like Amelia Kincaid is definitely, she's chewing a bit as like the goth girl who gets to like dance around and stuff like that. And yeah, when they eventually get to transform and they take these, these very clear, nasty feelings all these kids have for each other, but they just do it through the body horror. That was the strongest stuff for me, and I thought that stuff, was pretty well done. The only thing for me is that the whole thing is just it's a intentionally so, I think, but it's very, very light, and it's one of those things where like there's not much else to really get off of it other than it's clearly just doing a genre mashup parody that the filmmakers kind of wanted to all throw into a bit of an amalgamation, and I think they did it pretty solidly, but it's pretty loosely held together, I think.
Yeah, I could see that. I think I'm in the like strong 3 territory. I think this is something that I'll go back to on some Halloweens and have a really good time with, because it's very simple. It is exactly what it's set up to be. It's, teenagers go into a haunted place, demons take over, and they start killing each other. And to make them, super juvenile and mostly unlikable, I think really helps when the bodies start piling up. So, I had a lot of fun with the satire, and it is very lovingly made. I always love that. When you can just see it on screen that they gave a shit and were working really hard in the makeup effects and are kind of well versed still in the genre itself. Like, you can't make this kind of parody without knowing the genre itself, and I think it shines.
No,
through,
there's definitely a way lazier version of this movie that could have existed out there.
Yeah, exactly. So, I had a lot of fun with this. So strong 3 for now, and I think this could get in the rotation. It's a lot of fun, and I'm gonna check out the second and third one. Second one apparently is decent, so that'd be fun to just see more. I don't know how much they're going to expand on this. I imagine it's just kind of like the same thing but with different kills, which I am totally here for. So
that is what part 2 is. If you want to see a lazy version of this, watch the remake with Edward Furlong in it.
Okay.
Here's the thing.
I might do that. I kind of want to see.
Yeah.
It's not even that it's terrible. Honestly, it's not even that it's like some awful, like I have absolutely seen worse from that era, but it just was one of those, like, they literally did nothing to like improve, and it's like everything that I like about the original they really didn't do. But I would never argue that it was like terrible. I really don't think the remake was terrible. But if you want to watch one, stick with 1 and 2. 3, you really don't have to watch. 3 is not very good, but if you're a completionist, you can.
And it is Amelia that sticks with the series the whole time, right? I believe,
Angela's
as Angela. Yeah.
Yep.
That's kind of cool.
Yep.
I always do like consistency in sequels. It kind of bums you out when you see like 2 and 3 and 4 and no one is involved at all in the next 2 or 3. So that's cool.
And her facial makeup gets like increasingly more fucked up looking with like, each sequel. So for me, this is a 4. Like this is unquestionably a 4. And one thing I will say, Jamie, I like hearing you say that you're going to come back to this one because something that I left out here when I went, you're asking about like my history with this movie and VHS, USA Up All Night. Well, there was quite a long time between the VHS era and the Up All Night era. And like when this got a DVD release. So it had been, when I got it on DVD, it had been quite a while since I'd seen it. And watching it for that first time, I was kind of like a little underwhelmed. I liked it. I probably was in the same boat where I was like, it's a 3, it feels light. And it wasn't until I came back and watched it again, a year or so later that I was like, no, this is as fun as I remembered it being. And like, it hit well for me that time. And that's when it ended up, like I said, becoming a regular for me every Halloween. Yeah. But I
feel like if I watched it with my brother and we had a really good time watching it. But I feel like in a room with like 8 to 10 people and you're listening to the line eat a bowl of fuck, let's party would get like a huge reaction, you know what I mean? So
hearing to half of them react to for the first time to that lipstick just going into that nipple and being like, where the fuck did that go?
Yeah, exactly. Like what was that even doing there? Like, yeah, exactly. So
is that where they put those?
This whole time I thought it was just the bra. Crazy. Yeah. Yeah, it's there's a lot of fun to be had for sure.
Yeah, and like I said, the biggest thing for me is that it hits that. I could watch this not at Halloween and kind of get that like Halloween feeling from this if I watched it in like February even, It hits that sort of that itch for this season that I love so much, which is another reason that my rating is as high as it is probably. But yeah, it's a 4 for me.
Well, I think that's going to wrap it up for Night of the Demons. We're going to be right back, and we're going to be talking about Nightbreed. Stick around.
What chance have we got? They're armed. So am I.
Out of your deepest fears and your darkest fantasies, Clive Barker brings you a startling new breed of adventure. I won't let you down. Nightbreed. At last, the night has a hero.
Outstanding.
All right, we are back, and we are talking Nightbreed, the 1990 dark fantasy horror epic written and directed by Clive Barker and based on his 1988 novella called Cabal. And I think this is our second time doing Clive Barker, because previously we have talked about Hellraiser. And for anyone unfamiliar with Clive Barker, he is a horror novelist and comic book artist and short story writer who is very well known for his horror writing that frequently uses things like urban legends and incest and sexuality and self-mutilation and all kinds of crazy shit that translates very gruesomely to the screen. Obviously, probably most famously in his own adaptation, Hellraiser, which was an adaptation of his Hellbound Heart novella that he did himself, which we did do an episode on and talked about at length about how it's crazy that that's a debut film and that he was like not a technically proficient filmmaker when he made that, because it just has such a very unique and gross sensibility and vibe to the entire thing that's just so immediately, his own erotic, gory universe that's just amazing to watch. And so many people have tried to do their own version of it since. Like, they obviously continued the Hellraiser into a series, into a massive franchise, and they also adapted Candyman, which was adapted from one of his stories from his Books of Blood collection. But yeah, Clive Barker is a very interesting guy to be making what is here kind of like a fantasy action film. And it leads to some pretty bizarre results that I'm excited to get into.
Yeah, he's kind of like when it comes to genres, it's all over the place in this film, and in a very entertaining way. Like starting off with more of the slasher element with what we eventually find out is Cronenberg's doctor, but he's got this like he almost looks like a monster initially too, with the button eyes mask and the zipper for the mouth and all of that, and just kind of like the long black trench coat and everything.
Speaking of genre mashup, like you have a fantasy film, you have a slasher film, you have a sort of like freaks and monsters kind of film going on all at once. And for anyone who hasn't seen it, it very loosely follows this character by the name of Aaron Boone, played by Craig Sheffer, who is a how to describe Aaron Boone. I do love that everyone just calls him Boone, which I wasn't exactly sure why they all did, but nobody calls him by his first name. But he is just rocking the blue jeans and the black leather biker jacket, and he is a steel worker in Calgary who is seeing a psychotherapist by the name of Dr. Philip Decker, played by Canadian horror legend David Cronenberg. And I do like this takes place also in Canada, which I wasn't exactly sure why. I'm going to guess for budgetary reasons, but Clive Barker is very British, as we talked about a lot during Hellraiser, because we were like, man, the Brits are freaks for this one.
yeah, absolutely.
One of those rare movies where you can hardly believe like what your eyes are watching, even on rewatches. Hellraiser, I gotta say, that movie just like gets under my skin, everything about it. And in terms of the genre stuff, it's like, is it a cosmic sadomasochistic body horror film? Is it an erotic Fulci movie? You know, I don't know what it is, but pain is pleasure, and the intensity and the grotesqueness and the unrelenting bleakness of it just really does something for me. And I was surprised watching this that this is a much nicer film in an interesting way. But like I read that when Barker started this one out, he was basically like, monsters, I kind of think that they're cool guys. You know, we all we all envy them in some way. We kind of want to be them. Wouldn't it be cool to like fly around or live forever, or like that kind of thing? And so he literally was like, I want to make a monster movie, but about how the monsters are nice and the humans are the ones hunting them down and killing them, and you kind of want to identify with the monsters. So when he got, I'm guessing Hellraiser was a pretty decent success, because for some reason he got 5 times the budget of Hellraiser to make this. This is like a $11 or $12 million movie, and it is essentially, and we'll get into it here with Eric, but like this is essentially like a queer horror fantasy epic that he described as, when he was making it, as his Star Wars.
Yeah.
So just imagine the Hellraiser guy got to make his Star Wars. That's what we're talking about today.
And I feel like the themes, the essential theme of this, there's a lot of thematically, there's a lot of this that has to do with like coming out of the closet, and he has talked about that in interviews and stuff before, and it's not very subtle. Like I feel like it's pretty upfront with the whole like monsters and like Boone learning to accept who he is. And yeah, it's Barker. I think Barker is I'm a huge fan of his writing, his work. Books of Blood is great. The only movie of his that I can do on my show, and it's one that I absolutely love, is Midnight Meat Train, which he didn't direct, but that's like the only movie of his, I believe, that has a soundtrack, but one that I absolutely want to cover at some point, just to be able to talk about Clive Barker on my show, because I'm a huge fan of his work. I think that he is an extremely talented guy. And you were talking about him being British. I don't know if you've heard him talk recently, but the cigars are really doing a number on his throat. He sounds, it's even on Midnight Meat Train commentary, he is like, it is like this, like he's like polyps in his throat and shit.
Oh, damn.
It's really bad. But yeah, I'm a huge fan of his. And sometimes when a thematically something is a little too on the nose, it can make me, but this movie's so fun that I can kind of like, sometimes it's a little bit like, okay, it doesn't have to be so in your face. It can be a little more subtle, but like, I don't give a shit with this movie because it is such a fun movie all around that like, be as unsubtle as you'd like with the themes that you're trying to present to us here. I love this movie so much.
Yeah, he's definitely, that is something I found interesting about the film, is that it's pretty spelled out for you throughout. Like there's a lot of monsters explaining exactly how like the world works and just kind of like their issue with the humans. And obviously you have to explain that stuff, but it is very just like to the point. I found strangely enough, I was almost expecting it to be a little bit stranger in plotting. It is very strange just in the sense of how many directions it goes into, but I was surprised at how just simple the information's dished out.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was really taken with, I'll say specifically, like probably the opening half hour or so of the film, because it's a very subversive approach where we just follow this guy who's going to a psychotherapist, and it's cross-cut with these pretty creepy like murder slasher set pieces of a man, as Jamie mentioned, with button eyes and like a zipper mouth, going into people's houses and just brutally killing like a kid's parents in front of him. And these like very creepy wide angle lens shots of him like slitting their throats, and and it, as we find out, but I like that they're a little coy with it in the opening half hour. It is this very ambitious premise of David Cronenberg is actually the killer. So his psychotherapist is actually a serial killer who is using his clients' dreams that he's having, because Aaron Boone, every night he goes to sleep and he has these images in his mind of this monster city called Midian, where there is lots of fog and fences and monsters running around. And he's been describing this at length for months to his therapist, played by David Cronenberg. And so he looks at this and he goes, wow, this is a great tool for me, because I can set this guy up as a patsy. I can make him seem like he's fucking crazy and that he's imagining monsters, and he's living in fear. And yeah, maybe he would turn that out, and he would kill people. So the opening half hour or so of this is just like a guy being set up as a patsy for a serial killer. Yeah. And that is mostly like what you're watching. And it's a really cool like way to do that, because in the early goings, he's just like, oh man, like I don't have any memory of that, but we've seen that before. Like maybe he just blacks out, or it's one of those things where if it wasn't David Cronenberg getting as meaty of a role as he's getting in here, which I was also kind of surprised about.
Very surprised. He's in like half the film.
Yeah, he's in a lot of this, and he's chewing a little bit, and it was funny. Like if it wasn't Cronenberg being creepy, I feel like you wouldn't think of it for that long. You'd be like, oh yeah, maybe this guy is kind of a killer. Maybe his dreams and his therapy sessions are going wrong and turning into these murder scenes. Like, and he's showing him photos of them and giving him pills and saying, you're going to have to confess to all of this, which leads into these sequences where it turns out the doctor has given him LSD, and he's like having these hallucinatory scenes where he's burning all of his identifying materials and hallucinating having sex with his girlfriend while she's giving like a Streets of Fire style like glam rock performance at a bar.
They do like the full song too, at least in the director's cut. I'm not sure if in the theatrical they break it down, but like it's a full 3.5 minute song, which I found whenever a movie does that, I'm always surprised by, just because nowadays it would never ever happen. It kind of reminds me of, what was that movie we watched with it was by Pyun, and it had like a couple
Radioactive Dreams.
Yeah, just anytime that happens, I think back to that film, or just kind of like that era.
Just a music video exists in universe for about like 3 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. It's so bizarre.
The karaoke scene, actually, to answer that question, doesn't exist at all in the theatrical cut. And one other difference in the theatrical cut, as much as you like Cronenberg's screen time here, he's even more of a focus in the theatrical cut. Like, there's even more Cronenberg in the theatrical.
Well, yeah, because I read that they tried to play it up that it was like more of a slasher, because they liked the marketing team and the executives really liked the idea of like, well, slashers make money. So that was the whole thing, is that from what I understand, they tried to cut down at once some of the some of the drama, but they tried to include, how much of the fantasy stuff did they leave in, like the lore? Just out of curiosity, because Jamie and I were watching for the first time, and we watched the director's cut, but Eric went back to the theatrical cut so we could kind of discuss this at length. But like the reason these two cuts exist is because the studio was like, we don't really get what this movie is. And Barker says that the people who were in charge of like actually even marketing the film, they actually refused to watch the film. That they were basically just like, this guy made a disaster. He made a weird movie. We're just kind of grossed out by it. We don't care. Yeah. And they were told from up top that, okay, yeah, now this is cut as much of the violence as you can, but also now market this as a slasher. So when this came out, it was basically a disaster. Like, and it's not to say that
like watching a trailer where it just shows like it's a giallo or a slasher or something, and then you see all of these different like deformed monsters at a certain point, especially when he gets into Median, and it's like just an expansive set piece of every single monster design that they could come up with. It would really take a turn if that was all the marketing that you took in.
Yeah. So tell us, Eric, what's the other stuff that was like more emphasized in the theatrical?
Well, the lore is mostly there. That's the thing. Okay. They did keep most of the lore there, like the berserkers, the Baphomet. That stuff's all present in the theatrical cut as well. See, and it had been a long time. So I first saw this movie when it came out. Like literally, I was 10 when I first saw this movie. And I will say one thing. As far as the slasher marketing goes, that's a little bit on Clive Barker, because if he didn't want it to be marketed as a slasher film, he shouldn't have given Decker the coolest fucking mask I've ever seen anyone wear. It's honest to God, that mask is responsible, even though he's not a scarecrow. And like that mask, I think, is partially responsible for the fact that I, even now at 42 years old, am slightly uneasy about scarecrows, because it has like a scarecrow sort of look to it. So like, I can understand why they were like, we've got this character, let's run with this. But the lore is mostly present. They cut little bits down, but anything that like, you get the thrust of what Midian is. You understand what the struggle that the Nightbreed, as you would, the monsters, quote unquote, of Midian are dealing with. So that is all very present. They just mostly cut a lot of like extraneous stuff out. There's like at the very beginning, there's the dream sequence is cut out. The dream sequence that he has, whole part where she sings is cut out. So it's mostly just character building in the front half that they cut out of the film. But the Nightbreed stuff is all very present in the theatrical cut. So, but it just does feel like there's something. And I'm
assuming that some of the set piece stuff was trimmed for graphicness.
Yes, they cut that. They just made the thrust more. The main thrust of this is Decker versus Boone in the theatrical, whereas in this it's more Boone trying to help the Nightbreed break free from the chains of human
start
tyranny.
A revolution, like get up all the way up top, that kind of deal.
Yes, and it throws that shit all away at the end. The end, and I'll once we get through the movie, I'll explain the differences in the ending. But as far as that question goes, the lore itself is not very changed in the theatrical cut.
Okay. Yeah, well, because we really get into that stuff when, he is, thinks that he's a murderer. He's tripping on LSD that, Cronenberg gave him, telling him that it was lithium. And he gets nailed by a truck, and he ends up in a hospital where there's another man who's raving there about directions to Midian. And it's the first confirmation that someone else out in the world believes that this is like a real tangible place and not just something he's experiencing in his dreams. And that guy, very Clive Barker style, proceeds to prove his worth to this journey to Midian by giving him directions and then tearing his scalp off, because Barker just he loves a skinless man. And this guy shows his true monster self, because they have to, go there, and they have to, kind of earn their way in by being monsters. So he makes his way to this graveyard because he thinks that the city of Midian is beneath this graveyard. And his traveling there, I'll say too, you can tell this was shot in Alberta. There's some pretty amazing sort of like landscape vistas and stuff as they're going through there. And also some really nice like matte painting work too of like the entire graveyard and stuff. Like there's some really solid, just like bigger budget analog effects being done in this film, which is just very surprising because, like Hellraiser, for as much as I think that it's like a good looking movie for what it is, it was very clearly a first time director's film, and you kind of get the vibe through the production design and the makeup and everything about it. Whereas, this, you can see him putting a lot of effort into doing paintings and doing landscapes and, and still doing a lot of the makeup and stuff that he does. Because when he eventually does get to Midian, there is we will say a lot of effects work being done, including miniatures and like crazy subterranean bases just filled with monsters everywhere.
Yeah, like it feels as if, I don't know how many you actually see if you were to count, but it feels as if you see like hundreds of different monsters in this movie, which is really, really impressive. And they all have very individual designs a lot of the time. Some that go more with like what you'd be used to, someone walking around, and then others that are completely like blobs, almost similar to what you'd see in Society or something like that. So it kind of goes all over the place, which is really cool.
Yeah, that's one of the things that like I'm always struck by in this is how you said exactly how I feel, that there are, first of all, it ignores the number one rule of monster movies, which is show the monster as little as possible. Like this shows you the monsters as much as it can. But like they're all so different. Who like the makeup effects or the creature effects people in this, and the set designs too, like the set designs for Midian and all that. Like technically such an impressive piece of work from that standpoint that like they managed to get that much out of. I think because they could have had like a bunch of monsters who kind of look the same, like when you're in Midian you kind of look a certain way, but no, that's not the case at all. Like everyone looks different,
and it gives that whole, which I guess is kind of like the point of the film too, in a sense, where it's all these different monsters that have kind of just collectively come together because they live the same type of existence, and the humans are after them and all of that, so they have to go away in hiding. Which I do kind of, it's kind of like a fun little spin on the whole thing where the monsters are hiding from the humans, that kind of thing. But I do like that sense of community that they all have, being so different, which I know is definitely a point he's trying to get across.
Yeah. Well, I like the Peliquin and Kinski when he first shows up. Like that's your first real taste of the monsters of Midian is when he shows up, and they're two really great ones because you got Peliquin, who that part where he does. There are like parts of this that I still remember like freaking me out as a kid. One of them is the murder of the family with Decker and like him walking up to the. You left out that he kills a child, by the way. Like he walks up the stairs to a kid, which is really fucking brutal. And I could imagine the studio being like, "What the fuck do we do with this?" But that's kind of the angle they leaned with. But Peliquin, when he does that, where he's like shaking his head around, and it looks like those like flesh braids on his head are getting longer as he's doing it, like they're like growing. Yeah. And Kinski looks like the Mac Tonight guy from the McDonald's commercials, but he's kind of like the friendly one. But they just right up front, the two that you see are so distinct looking, and they're both like very present in the film. They're very, very big roles.
Yeah, the one's got the deformed head and the sharpest goatee you've ever seen. He looks like a little devil almost. Yeah. And they get a sick line actually where he's just like, God's an astronaut, Oz is over the rainbow, and Midian is where the monsters live. Because he's basically gone here to be like, look, I need to be punished for being a murderer. I'm a monster, and my dream, he interprets his dreams as he needs to go there because, he's a monster and he belongs there with them. But they go, well, no. So whoever told you that you're a murderer is a liar. You're an innocent and you are a natural meat, and fuck the law, because the laws tell them that they can't, they have to go take him down to their overlord or whatever. And he's just like, I'm just going to eat this guy. I want the meat. But then it turns into this big chase scene where he ends up pushed all the way back towards the cops in Cronenberg. And it's one of my favorite moments in this film because it was probably the moment I was the most shocked by, where Cronenberg claims to be like, I'm his therapist. I can talk him down. So he goes up to him and he's just like, I'm here to help you out, man. Like we'll get you out of here. And then you just see him go wide-eyed and straight up lie and just yell gun back towards the cops and tell them all that, Boone is dangerous. He's about to shoot someone. And Boone just gets fucking massacred by a sea of gunfire from these cops and just squibs going everywhere. And I was like, oh, wow. So the protagonist of this film was just shredded by gunfire in the opening 30 minutes and he's dead.
Yeah. And
I was like, that's cool.
I also like that they... Like at that point, you definitely have to start suspecting Cronenberg's character, but he's just like, when the cop comes and sees that there was absolutely no gun, he's just like, hey, he reached into his jacket. I didn't know what else to do. It's like just great, solid, patient cop work right there.
This is really funny to me to hear because so again, having seen this movie I watched this movie over the years, how many times, whatever, 30 plus years. I don't remember my first watch of this, and I feel like last night I was watching it and I'm like, I feel like the Cronenberg thing is pretty phoned in. So hearing the two of you say that, like, you were caught off guard, because again, I don't remember my first. I'm sure I was the same way, where I was like, whoa, he's he's the killer, but like I didn't know. Watching it for this, I was like, maybe it is a little phoned in, that like right away that like Cronenberg, because Cronenberg plays this character as such a blank slate. Yeah. Like it almost feels like, okay, but I feel like part of that could be watching it, knowing who Cronenberg is, thinking that maybe Cronenberg's acting chops just aren't that great. But like, it's a great performance on his part, because he does play that character as like a sociopath. But like,
yeah, he's definitely creepy, and I buy him as someone who's in the field of medicine and also like a freak. Right. And so it does play better than I thought. Hearing you two saying that, like, that's kind of where you started to realize that, hey, wait a minute, maybe we shouldn't trust this guy. Yeah. Well, that's just it. Is he was giving off bad vibes as a performer, I think. But I think that, like, in the opening to the especially in the when we were watching the director's cut, like I was like, definitely I was with the character's shock that he was like, he thought that maybe he was the killer, but then, clearly something else was happening, but the exact details of it. So yeah, I was totally like, I wouldn't say it was like a huge like twist moment. I went, oh, that makes sense. But it was definitely like, I didn't upfront. I wasn't like, yeah, no, he's the killer. And then I looked at all the log lines, where all the log lines were basically like revealing that in them. And I was like, man, was I supposed to know that earlier? I don't know.
I think the reason I was surprised that he would pull that move too was because he kind of needed Boone to keep killing. And even once he continues to kill, I think there's even a certain point when the cops are like, the families are still being killed and people are still being killed, but Boone is dead. So what's going on? And then Cronenberg responds with something like, "Oh, he's actually still alive," and that kind of thing. So it feels as if like I guess I wasn't expecting him to just dispose of Boone so quickly. And that was probably where my shock came from, because I did expect Cronenberg to be bad, because he just kind of gives those vibes off, and if he's going to have like a big part in a film like this, it's not surprising that he would be a negative force. But I did find it surprising when that cop scene popped off.
Yeah, well, there's also a cool shot of him like lying in the field after that happened, and a really cool like POV shot there attached to the gurney that he's on, like in the mortuary when he's being dragged around. Definitely. And because little did his psycho doctor know, but Midian is actually a very real place, and the bite that he got from the monsters that he ran into when he was trying to give himself over to Midian have turned him into NIGHTBREED, and so he has awoken, and he is undead, and he is kind of this monster now, but he wants to be part of it. So he goes and he does a little initiation ceremony where he is touched by the blood of their lord Baphomet, and the tribes of the moon embrace him. And he's becoming one with them, and deciding that this could be a new life for him. Although his girlfriend Lori is still in shock about what happened and isn't quite ready to let him go. She's a little confused at his the exact methods of his parting from her. So there's a funny little subplot where she like befriends a woman at a Western bar called Cheryl Ann, who agrees to drive with her to Midian to find out why her dead boyfriend left her. And there are these kind of cool sequences where, like, when she, like, for example, when Lori gets to Midian, it's the scene where she finds like a wet little hairy creature, which is like just on the ground. She like picks it up, and she's trying to figure out like why it's kind of in pain. And she brings it inside to one of the residents of Midian, and it turns out that it's actually a little girl. And when she's not in the sun and she can be back in her house down below, she actually recovers and is healthy again, and she was just kind of stuck playing in the sun, which is what got her in trouble.
And she
starts finding out about the society.
Which is interesting, just because she's really like the only one besides I can't remember her name now, but the woman that kind of seduces people and then kisses them to death, which is her mother, I believe, or at least her caretaker. But the majority of all the monsters have something that's very strange about their physical appearance. And I kind of liked that hers is once she's exposed to their weakness, that's when she kind of becomes the deformed version of herself. So yeah, there's a lot of cool little ideas when it comes to how the monsters work themselves.
Well, there's also a lot of people being horny for the monsters in this movie, like
Yeah,
humans.
well, I mean, it's Clive Barker, you know.
Gotta have some kink in there.
Well, I actually think so. One of the if look, as much as I love this movie, if I had to give one really valid complaint, it's that I don't think Craig Sheffer is very good in this movie.
I don't think so either.
And Bobby as Laurie, I think, is very good. Like, she really does have that sweet girl thing that who would stick by him no matter what down. Like, she's very good in this. I think performance wise, all around, it's very good. I just think the big issue might be Craig Sheffer as the lead was not the right fit. But
yeah, I think he's he has the right look. I just found his delivery to be boring a lot of the time. I did find Laurie's investigation a little bit more intriguing than his learning about Median and the monsters. When she is initially going down there and sees all the different, she sees the homes and she sees all the different monsters that she's walking past because she's trying to find Boone. I found that stuff to be more intriguing actually than Sheffer's stuff, and I think most of it was due to the delivery of the performance. So yeah, I would agree.
Mm-hmm. I really like another one too is hold on, Hugh Ross. I couldn't think of the actor's name. Hugh Ross is Narcissus, the guy who cuts his face off. He gives a very he is having a blast playing that part.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. He's pretty much smiling the entire time as he's ripping off his scalp for the first time. And then even when he's got the scene where Laurie goes into a room and he's dancing with the dead body. And he's just he's talking about having a romantic night and all of that stuff. He's having an absolute blast. He was a fun character.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I kind of like this pivot to there are some elements of it that are still horror-esque, obviously, when they go into Midian and there's the subterranean staircase with the snakes and the beasts, and it's cross-cutting between that and Cronenberg, still continuing on his murder spree that he's continuing, that dude who he ties up with Christmas lights and interrogates with him and gets the line, "I'm death, plain and simple."
Yeah, and then just stabs him right in the torso. It's pretty brutal. Or even watching when we come across Cheryl Ann when Laurie comes back from the monsters.
Oh, and her hanging there with stabbed into the tree. Yeah,
it's pretty brutal. So yeah, they definitely they get the horror elements really right with mostly the Cronenberg character, because a lot of the time with the monsters they really dive more into the fantasy elements, and even when they get to the fighting, which we'll get to with more detail. It's more action heavy and fantasy heavy than horror. Yeah. So I found that interesting.
Yeah, well, because that's what I kind of enjoy, is because it's almost like you get the more family friendly version of the Cenobites. All of these monsters when they go down there, they find a whole nother world. It is a feat of production design, similar to when they open up the cube inside the Hellraiser movies, and they find all these creatures, and they have powers and weaknesses, and they get this sort of backstory about how they've all been hunted down throughout history like freaks, and there's actually this insanely graphic flashback of witch burnings and decapitations and charred corpses and hooded executioners and everything, and they basically depict these. It's like if the Cenobites were depicted as peaceful creatures who were hunted into extinction, essentially, is what you're kind of getting with Midian, which is kind of cool. And especially when you have Laurie going deep enough into the catacombs that she's finding all the various monsters, the chunky dude who has the head inside of his stomach.
Yeah, or that's my favorite.
The very slimy eyeless guys. There's even guys who just straight up look like charred devils who are riding beasts and stuff. All of the effects work is just so goopy and so fun, and there's caged monkey men and just blobs everywhere, and it almost has this haunted house circus music to it, because I read that Elfman did the soundtrack to this, and this is following up 1989's Batman, so the score is very, very much in that kind of realm where it has some kind of dark elements, but it also has some kind of like
Almost
more
silly
sweeter.
sometimes.
Yeah, a little sillier. Like there's even some kind of like mystical, like kind of elements to it as well. It's a fun score.
Elfman was, I think, mentioning he's like he basically I think he understood how strange this movie was and how many different directions it was going, and so he ended up using like a ton of different percussion instruments and almost tribal stuff at a certain point, which is cool, and it definitely works well with the monsters and their community. But yeah, he's doing a lot of different instrumentation in this, and that's in true Danny Elfman fashion. He's always been kind of like almost cartoonish with his scores in a great way. But he does really suit well to this because it's just such a crazy mix-up of so many different things, and I think his sound works.
And what a sight to score too, right? Like it's one of those things where it's almost like Barker got to do like the Hellraiser 2-esque set design and world building that film got to do that he didn't get to be as much of a part of, and like this whole Midian underground thing, it's just, like I love how gross it is, like the stains to it, the texture to it. Like again, has such a good eye for that kind of lived in grotesquerie, even when he's trying to depict this as like something that it's this is a direct result of all of these monsters being driven underground in a very unfair kind of fantasy-esque way.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
And her whole walk down through the catacombs to find Boone is like, look, let's not kid ourselves. It's literally an excuse to show off, like, it's like a highlight reel of set design and FX work. But I love that. I love it. I love that they do. And then I like the part where you learn about the berserkers, where even like, again, air quote monsters, there's something down there that even the monsters are scared of. And that's the berserkers down there. You kind of like set that up. And they're going to come into play at some point. But this idea that
Chekhov's berserkers.
yes. That there's something down there that even the monsters don't want to fuck with.
I was gonna ask, is the Laurie sequence, is it cut up a little bit more in the theatrical version? Because I like it a lot, but I did find that it feels very long. Like what you said, it's kind of showing off all of the production design and all of the makeup effects and stuff. And I would just be curious if, like, in a theatrical release, they'd be like, let's just cut like a little bit of that so that she can get to Boone faster and all of that. But is the whole thing in there?
Now, here's the thing. That's one I cannot say 100% for sure, but I feel like it is cut down. But if it is, it's not like severely cut. You know what I mean? Gotcha. It might have been something where they trimmed a little bit. Because it is it's
one of the
sequence.
best parts. Yeah. It's definitely lengthy. It's just so much fun to watch because he never runs. It feels as if he never ran out of ideas of different monster designs. There's just like one different monster after another as she goes deeper and deeper into the catacombs. So it's really. I enjoyed that sequence a lot.
Yeah, well, and it is interesting too that like from there it does kind of become a bit of like a resistance actioner almost, and still with like a level of grossness that is completely Barker. Like I love how he can even turn a scene of like a girl picking up a pastry off a floor into something that just feels gross. I'm like, girl, why are you picking it up that way? It's so much messier to pick it up in chunks like the way you're picking it up, which then of course that turns into a scene where Cronenberg has decapitated her friend in front of her and then stabs her to death. And then it kind of turns into like an on the run like Terminator thing for a little while. Like Boone is in like his sunglasses and his leather jacket, like hiding out in motels. I was reminded a little bit of the biker gang supernatural action thing of like Near Dark or something, but like mixed with a little bit of like a fantasy comic book aspect that I know that Barker was definitely a fan of. And
I guess this is also where like when he turns, it gets into the subplot, which is kind of the ending in a sense too, where between him and Laurie, they're having trouble really connecting because, or at least they have like a fear of them being able to connect because it's the monsters versus the naturals, I think they call them.
Yes.
So I think that's the beginning of that, because they have a scene where they're like trying to kiss or connect and they can't really, and eventually they do, of course, but I think that's where it starts in that hotel sequence before the SWAT team arrives and he has to escape.
and the cops just beat the shit. I thought it was going to be an action scene from there, but it turns out they just like pick him up and the cops just beat the shit out of him.
Yeah.
And they're like, "You're a fucking freak." And I was like, "Okay, Barker, I see what you're doing here."
Yeah.
His makeup too, when he turns, is pretty cool. He's got like little, like it looks like little sigils or something on his face. You know, like there's like patterns on his face. Like the Boone monster effects are really cool looking.
Yeah. Yeah, and they do a lot of cool natural transformations to it too.
Well, and he ends up next to that weird priest that he ends up locked up next to plays a much bigger role in the director's or in the theatrical version. A different sort of role, I guess. It's this pretty much the same, but like the payoff is very different for his character.
Based on the ending.
Yes,
that's what I read. Yeah.
You know, that's you got to have the. I like that the priest is kind of up until the moment that he gets all fucked up is like sympathetic though for to like you know, it's cops versus monsters at the end. The cops are the villains, and the cops are like murderous psychopaths when everything comes to a head. At the end.
They're like, hey, why don't we shoot them in their graves? It would save us digging new ones.
Yeah,
yeah, it's wild.
I like the cop too when Boone, when he learns that Boone's dead and that he was killed in front of Decker and that Decker's like essentially been lying to him the whole time, and he's like, he's not lying on the ground dead. He's walking around in my fucking cell dead. It's like a really funny line.
Yeah, and he's like that guy that plays the cop. Who is it? It's Captain. The character's Captain Eagerman, but he plays like he's just outright the most evil cop ever. At a certain point, when the cops are like getting kind of overrun by the monsters in the battle sequence, he's just like, "You're all cowards, and I'm going to kill every single one of you." And then he starts to try to shoot at everybody that was presumably his like colleague and friend. And you know, he doesn't have any bullets, but it's just like he's completely unhinged. Even before, you know, that moment, he's unhinged. But he just plays him like a total crazy person.
Well, yeah, and he's played by the actor Charles Hayde, who is from one of our favorite slimy cop movies of all time, the movie just called Cop from 1988 with James Woods.
I didn't recognize him. That's awesome. Love Cop.
They have that. There's that extremely harrowing scene where they drag the one, like it's like the sweet, gentle one who had the pet dog that they drag out into the sun and like cook alive. You know, like, oh
my God, yeah, what a moment, Jesus Christ!
It's terrible. It's hard to watch. It's a terrible scene. I mean, it's great. It sets the cops up as like the ultimate villain. Humans as the ultimate villains because again, you know, they didn't take somebody who could have handled themselves, like you know, old Pelican or something like that. Like they took. Yeah, they're like this sweet, gentle guy, the sweet, gentle monster who's just like all smiles and shy, and like drag him into the sun and kill him in the worst manner possible. And
dude, when he explodes from the sun, it's like dusty chunks. I've never seen anything quite like that one.
Yeah,
and speaking of Near Dark again, it reminded me of the shootout when they can't go into the sun.
Oh yeah, totally.
They're like burning up, and which is one of my favorite aspects of that film because it takes the Western imagery of, you know, like bullet holes in a motel, and then the sunbeams coming through are like burning them and stuff like that. And this has a, you know, a sort of similar thing where the cops drag the dude out, which would normally just be the scene where they, you know, they just beat this poor guy, but instead the sun chars his skin and then has him explode in front of them, and they're all just like, damn, that was kind of cool.
There's that one cop too, and they're preparing to go to all out war that they show. He's got a garrote wire, and he's like, "Ooh, a garrote." And he like erotically licks the fucking thing.
Oh my God, yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. Speaking
and they recruit all the local like gun nuts and everything too. Like they're almost doing like they're ready to do like a genocidal purging of these monsters. Like that's the deal.
Yeah, and I gotta say they had a little bit of I like the Barker kink in there just in the scene with Boone and Laurie where they're it's a moment again where they're trying to connect like physically, and he's turning. And at first it seems like he's almost going to get rough with her, but instead it just turns into him like licking her neck and getting a little bit kinkier with it so they can still kind of connect on a level. Just classic Barker stuff, which I also appreciated.
Mm-hmm. And it eventually leads to what is like almost a 30-minute long climax.
Yeah.
Which is so long and crazy. And the thing that I'll say about it is that the action staging and cutting is a little awkward.
Yeah.
Like you can tell that Barker, this is the first time he's been given this much money. You don't know that, he's framed action this way. And he's ambitious. He's trying to do like car chase moments in it, shootouts, like massive explosions, like cars crashing into what looks like hell on earth, into like giant miniature set pieces.
He's trying to incorporate like the monsters' powers themselves. Like there's one guy that has two tentacles that come out of his body and then like gouge somebody's eyes out and stuff like that, or suck the eyes out and shit. So there are some, or the I don't remember her name, but she's kind of got like spikes all over her, and she starts to kind of
the hedgehog seductress is what I wrote down.
Nice, that's what we're calling her for sure.
Yeah, that's another weird horny monster scene.
yeah, exactly.
She's like, "Hey, cops, like come on over here," and she's literally a giant hedgehog woman, like showing off her body.
It's funny because like with the other one that they do that, she kind of it gets all misty in the jail cell, and then she becomes topless, and then she kisses the cop, and then he dies because of some like, I don't know, poison or something like that. But it shows how you would be seduced by someone like that or along those lines. Whereas with the spiky girl, they never cut away from to the cop's perspective where they're seeing like a more traditionally pretty woman. It's just the spike girl, and they're still like, oh, you know what? Maybe. Why not? And then, of course, you get like the spikes in the face and all of that, which is great. But I did find that funny that they're seduced by her in general at all and not just instantly freaked out and running away.
Yeah, well, these monsters, they just can't hide any longer. They got to fight back against all of these, very trigger-happy fascists. But they're all being, like, it's still a very violent sequence. Like they're all being like, most of them are being slaughtered. Cronenberg is still out there running around with his mask on, just trying to kill people. This is where the Cronenberg stuff started to get a little silly for me, because I was like, we at this point we've kind of abandoned the slasher movie. This is like a giant action set piece, and I don't know how scary he is anymore in like these scenes where you have like, the cops are bursting through and graphically slaughtering our little goopy creature buddies and their children, like they're like stormtroopers, and you have the monsters fighting back by like fist punching through chests. And I was like, Cronenberg just running around with like a knife. I was like, oh.
Yeah, that is the thing. It's like once you get this kind of more expansive world of monsters, he becomes a lot more tame. But they still paint him as like an incredibly threatening force, I guess. And for Boone,
he still gets like a boss finale action scene.
Exactly. And I do like the way he dies, where he stabs Boone like through the chest, and then Boone uses the thing that's still the knife that's still in his chest to push him into him and stab him. I always like when they use like their own injury against the opponent. That's always fun in any film.
Also, a really great shot when he drops to the. Oftentimes when you toss like a obviously this wasn't like a stuntman that they tossed down below 20 feet onto like stone, but like oftentimes when you use like a dummy in place of something like that, but this looks like there's like heft to this thing that they drop. It looks like an actual body hitting a hard surface when he tosses him down to the rocks below. So yeah, it's really well done, his death. Yeah, and satisfying.
I also liked this one just popped in my head. I like the one part where the cop, I think it's like the initial time where they start the battle sequence, and I think it's the Dread monster, and he gets ran over by the truck, but of course he's okay because he's immortal. And then the truck just bursts into the ground and completely like goes into their little underground area and like crashes through all the bridges and then explodes and all of that. It's there are some like really cool action beats in this, even though I do think his direction here and there can be a little bit clunky with it. But it's just that there's so much to look at that you do kind of forget about it. For me it got a little bit exhausting, just because he is throwing so much at you, and some of it can be a little bit jarring. But you are watching somebody that absolutely loves what they're putting on screen, and that shines through obviously, like throughout the entire.
Oh yeah,
film,
there's so much passion, and and again the ideas, though obvious, are like obviously very admirable. This idea of like turning all of these quote unquote unnatural freaks into this persecuted other. I've seen people literally compare this and the queer angle to it to like Rent. And like Barker definitely kind of has that quality, but it's mixed with what is, just what is uniquely him, like the dorky and gross like genre ambition in which he needs to do to cathartically express those ideas. Like you wouldn't immediately think like the way someone would channel that would be Hellraiser.
Right.
But with Barker, that's absolutely what he's done here. And I think that for quite a bit of this, maybe his reach exceeds his grasp on it. It's a bit of a mess to watch. There's a little bit of tonal craziness with just how grisly the horror can be, but almost how silly and childlike some of the, fantasy plotting can be. Yeah. But again, and also, it's a very expensive looking movie, but Barker is obviously still in some ways kind of an amateur director in other ways. But, it's one of those things where it's filled with so much insane shit that I've never seen before, and like a level of true imagination and glee. Yeah. That, David Cronenberg as a serial killing weirdo is like the fifth strangest thing in the movie. Right. It's just like, this is like, it's a hefty budgeted fantasy blockbuster with janky narrative beats, but the design work is pure, and makeup and gore and everything, and like the disgusting spectacle of it all. It pounded me into submission, I think, when we got to the end, because I was sitting there going like, this is clunky. A lot of this action, and it's overlong, especially in the director's cut. But it's one of those things where I just kind of kept going, man, when is he going to run out of things to show me? and he kind of just doesn't.
Yeah, it's crazy. And like, I imagine that this, needed to be edited down. But I think I was reading somewhere in here when they were talking about how the director's cut didn't happen until afterwards, because they actually ended up finding a bunch of what they thought was lost footage, and they found like an extended 159-minute version on a VHS. And so I'm just
the
like,
Cabal cut.
I'm just like, what the hell could possibly be in that extra hour? That's fucking insane.
I want to see it though so bad. Like, I want the Cabal cut. I want it so bad.
Yeah, if anyone out there that we know has the Cabal cut, send it to us, please.
Yeah, I would 100% watch it, because I'm curious because I can't imagine the kind of simple plotting gets expanded. So I would imagine it's just like more monster shit just over and over and over again, which I can definitely appreciate.
Yeah,
I don't know how much more expansive like they can get with the whole, we're the unnaturals, we're going to fight the human beings who have suppressed us and all of that. I can't imagine the extra hour goes towards more of that, but who knows?
One part that always kind of cracks me up in this, like unintentionally, is when Boone is learning from Baphomet that his actual purpose was to break the chains of the Nightbreed, basically, and find a new home, that he is the Cabal. And they show like the prophecy written on the wall, and it's like a drawing of a guy in like a white t-shirt and black jeans. Like, that is just so funny to me. Like, it is so funny to me.
They knew what era he was going to come in and what the fashion would be.
That is funny.
But this whole thing ends on like a giant action set piece where there's, the berserkers get unleashed. They start like flipping cop cars, and dudes with flamethrowers are falling over and exploding. There's a Cronenberg action scene, which has got to be the only, on what looks like a Mortal Kombat stage. Yeah. Everything dude, just keeps getting I'm so glad you weirder and bigger.
Because it literally, I think I wrote it down too. It reminded me of the Scorpion versus Johnny Cage battle in Mortal Kombat when they go down to hell.
That's literally what it looks like.
Yeah, that's exactly what
it literally looks like what hell looks like in the Mortal Kombat.
That's very funny. Yeah, glad you had that same thought.
But eventually, they do, absolutely annihilate all of the cops. They kill Cronenberg and dummy toss him into a pit. They get their way out, but no home is forever, and they must rebuild what they have destroyed. And as Eric pointed out, he becomes the new leader of the Cabal. And in the director's cut, there's this big ending where he like refuses to take Laurie with him, so she literally like kills herself, like Romeo and Juliet style, essentially, to be like him.
Yeah.
So that he's forced to bite her and save her and make her part of the the undead Midian. And they become literally part of the prophecy wall in like the sunrise backdrop, and that's how the movie ends. They are going to lead the monsters to a new Midian.
Yes.
And they're just kind of waiting for them to come back. Like this, it's like the shot of the Nightbreed, like just kind of hanging out. Like, okay, well, whenever he comes back, we'll start this over.
Yeah. Is there was there a different ending for the theatrical? Because that's what I read.
I'll run through a few differences here. So one thing you have to understand too about the theatrical and the director's cut is that the director's cut isn't just a theatrical cut with extra stuff added. There's like shit cut from the theatrical version, like a significant portion, because it's the director's cut. The theatrical, I believe, is 1 hour and 40 minutes. The director's cut is 2 hours long, but there are 40 extra minutes in the director's cut. So they trim like 20 minutes out of the theatrical cut.
Oh, okay.
Mostly the stuff that's added is, like I said, the first half, it's like a bunch of scenes at the beginning where it really doesn't change the movie too much. It's mainly just like character building, some dialogue, the dream sequence where he's tripping on LSD, Laurie having the scene where she's doing the karaoke is completely new. But the alternate ending, Laurie does not kill herself. Ashbury has the announcement that he's going to seek revenge on the Nightbreed and kills the captain is not present in the theatrical version. And one of the big things too is that Narcissus does survive in the theatrical cut. The director's cut is where you see him with his head cut off by Decker. He just kind of vanishes. Like you don't see him for the rest of the movie in the theatrical cut. So the theatrical cut ending is Decker is actually chained up by the priest. The priest has Decker chained up, and it's like Decker like dead, his dead body hanging there, and he's almost like in a crucifixion pose.
Okay.
And the priest revives him. So the final shot of the theatrical cut is Cronenberg's head snaps up real quick, and through that creepy mask, he's just screaming because he's like a reanimated corpse, psychopath. So the ending of the theatrical cut is him like going, and like I said, none of that stuff. Laurie doesn't kill herself. They don't have him as like the new leader of the Nightbreed. None of that is present in the theatrical cut. It just ends with, it's again slasher in pure slasher formula. The slasher coming back to life at the end, but he's like screaming under that mask. It's just him like, and that's how it cuts to credits in the theatrical cut.
Okay. Huh. So it's like he's making a return.
Yes.
Seems like they're setting up a bunch of possible sequels if they could.
If they could have, yes. They were trying to prepare for a sequel, but this ended up tanking and that didn't happen. But yeah, so mostly it's again, it leans into the Decker thing, but it cuts a lot of the Decker stuff out in the director's cut, and it adds a bunch of dialogue, but the lore stuff is mostly present, and it changes the ending. I guess the big part of the lore that's cut is in the end, involving the Cabal thing and Boone being like the new guy and Laurie killing herself to come along with him. Like none of that happens in the theatrical cut. It just ends with them defeating the cops. Everybody's kind of wins at the end. They're happy, and then they do have to find a new home, but the priest, as opposed to like saying he's going to kill the Nightbreed, doesn't really say what he's planning on doing, just that he brings back Decker at the end. And like I said, we're taken to the end credits with this like very loud shot of Decker screaming in agony on this sort of crucifix that the priest has set up for him.
Interesting.
Yeah, I want to watch the theatrical. It seems different enough for it to be kind of just taken completely differently. So I'm gonna take a look at it eventually. I just didn't know where to find it. Everything that I looked for online seemed to be the DC. I don't know if that's just the more popular version right now, but yeah.
Why? And it's the one that they put out more recently on the Blu-ray, and the one that Barker like tells people to watch. Like it's the one that
is
like,
his
is
vision.
The most. Yeah. Like it was the one that no one thought anyone would ever see, and they actually, they really did give him a shot to, cut his preferred version of it. And it is sort of interesting which one they ended up going with. And I think pivoting towards the reductive rating round, I think on Nightbreed here, this one gets a very high 3 from me as well. I definitely do want to watch the theatrical, and I want to give this one another go, like kind of knowing what it is going in, because this was another one where it was very like, as a first time experience, I was having my mind melted a little bit, and the movie was changing gears like every 30 minutes, and I was like, I don't know how much of this is good and how much of this is just like weird and a blast, and regardless, I was charmed by it.
Yeah, I felt like my brain was kind of like resetting every 20 minutes, as if I was watching a different thing again. And so I kind of feel you there.
Yeah. So it's just, once again, I think it's incredibly admirable and dorky and gross, but like the thing is just, obviously a bit of a mess, and obviously, the 80s fantasy storytelling aspect, there's some very clunky stuff going on there, and at 2 hours long too, Barker, he has an impressive depth of gruesome imagination, but it's just one of those things where it's hard to spend 2 hours sometimes with someone who, hasn't necessarily figured out all the nuts and bolts of how to do a dramatic scene or an action scene, and is just kind of, skating by on pure passion, which I will say, for someone doing that, Barker
it's wild.
Is doing it. Yeah, like it's, like this is exactly the movie. Like, I just have to respect that, $12 million was given to this like queer horror novelist, and he was like, I'm gonna make the horror Star Wars epic, and it is going to be, it is going to open on 30 minutes of the main guy being gaslit by his serial killer psychologist played by David Cronenberg, that results in him having like horrible dreams and trips and getting riddled with bullets by cops. And then it's going to end on 30 minutes of like the biggest, gnarliest fantasy war finale you've ever seen, with like incredible sets and miniatures and explosions and gore and just nonstop like monsters versus cops. And like the thing couldn't be more obvious, but you could I at a certain point, I did like feel what it was that he was going for, like listening to Cronenberg very creepily deliver that little monologue I don't think we mentioned, where he's talking about like, I've cleaned up a lot of breeders, families like cesspools who just make like filth and then continue to make filth and make filth. And, like he's literally talking about like, committing genocide against a group of people. Meanwhile, you have the monsters who are like, they're passionate. They're just like, haven't you always envied us for being able to fly or like to be a wolf? And it's she's like, when you dream of doing the kinds of things that we can do, even if they kind of gross you out in like a practical, looking at us
this is what it looks like
the
though.
Real world in this kind of way. And to combine that with like the fact that then they get weirded out by these unnatural beings and they destroy them, and like all of that stuff I think is very graphic and disturbing. So I think that Barker is going for something cool, and this is more successful than it should be on a filmmaking level. So high 3 for me.
I think I'm there with you. I just want to check out the theatrical version to see the differences, and to see if that lack of like the cut 20 minutes keeps my, it's not that I shouldn't say it keeps my attention, because I did find I was glued to the film. It's just that there were a lot of different directions it took, and I don't know if he cohesively edited them together in such a way that was completely like, I found it jarring at times, and I feel like I just want to rewatch it knowing exactly where it goes, what kind of tone it's taking. The simplicity of the plot was a little bit, eventually I found it to just be like, I know what you're doing, so I am just kind of here now for the monster designs and the battle and all of that. But now just knowing where it all leads, and how passionate he clearly is, like you can see all the passion on screen, so that's something that sells it well. I just want to retackle it, I think, and give it another shot. So I'm gonna give it the strong 3, but I think this could honestly get the upgrade. I'm gonna watch the theatrical and then maybe even rewatch the DC one of these days.
Hell yeah.
I will say, as somebody who spent however long with the theatrical cut only, the theatrical cut, warts and all, just like the director's cut, warts and all, is absolutely worth watching and very good. This movie's absolutely a 4 for me too. Like, I really do love Nightbreed. I for all of its flaws that we've covered some of them in here. I guess there's also a nostalgia with this. Both of these movies we've talked about have this like sort of nostalgia thing that maybe paints my opinion here, or my rating here a little bit, but I can't help but respect the ambition on display here that Barker showed, regardless of how this turned out. Like, it is very close to being more of a fiasco, but like, I respect that aspect of it. Like that makes it more fun. That it's dangerously close to fiasco territory, but he manages to thread that needle right and push it over to the right side. That I think this movie it's very watchable. It's trying to say things that maybe, and the humans are the real monsters is not like a brand new thing here, but like, who cares when you're getting 2 hours of like really great goopy effects on top of it that keeps your attention in ways that maybe it wouldn't have without all of that. And I think the performances
and I want to say, and like we talked about with Rob Zombie on The Devil's Rejects, like it's very clear that Rob Zombie, he identifies with the monsters more than he does, the other characters in the films. And you can definitely feel that with Barker here. Like the fact that, it'd be super easy to be like, the monsters are so cute and peaceful, but he's like, no, they're fucking gross and peaceful.
They're still trying to kill Boone and like Laurie and stuff. So it's not like they're just, retired or something like that. They're definitely still trying to kill and all that.
He likes the fact that these people are strange and unique and you can't look away from them, and they are, I really respect that aspect of it, and it's totally felt in, like the way that he chose to design the world that he made.
Yeah, it's an ambitious and passionate mess, and I love any time a film feels like that. It just sometimes takes me a little bit longer to latch onto it completely, because it does feel messy, but it's just like you see all of his love on screen, and I can't help but love that, so.
Yeah, and like I do prefer at the end of the day the director's cut is the one that I prefer.
Okay.
Okay.
But the theatrical, I will tell you, is absolutely worth watching. And if I were rating both cuts, honestly, I would rate both cuts a 4. Like, I have no problem saying that I think both cuts are a 4. I just think that they're good in their own ways. And it is absolutely. I got that the Shout Factory version that came out with the. It was like the deluxe version that had like the theatrical cut. It was like 3 discs, and it was nice going back and actually watching the theatrical for the first time in a very long time, because I pretty much had done away with the theatrical, but it still holds up very well. And I do recommend, if you watch one, watch the other one.
Awesome. Well, I think that is going to wrap it up for Nightbreed and for this week's episode. That was Night of the Demons from 1988 and Nightbreed from 1990. Thanks so much, Eric, for joining us and for bringing these films with you.
Oh, thank you for having me on. Like, I am so, because when you asked me, the first thing that popped in my head was just like Nightbreed, and it hadn't been done on here before. And I was shocked to learn that you hadn't seen it. And then I was like, well, how about Night of the Demons? And to learn that like you hadn't seen that one either, I was like super excited. I'm always a fan of like doing it that way too, because I think neither you had seen Slugs or Pieces either, right? Like,
nope.
Yeah. So it's always fun to like get first reactions from this, especially for me who has like, again, like nostalgia. I'm the first to admit, like, I have a whole podcast dedicated to like how cool it was to have soundtracks in the 90s. So like nostalgia can definitely be a huge deciding factor on my opinions of things. So it's cool to hear like the opinion of somebody who is like watching it for the first time in 2022. So it was really good to come on here and talk about this, because like I said, these are 2 movies that I would love to talk about that will never happen on my own show. And it was a blast coming on and doing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, we totally felt that, because when we were like, we're going to go on over to Soundtracker, our first thought was, well, what is something that is outside of our guidelines for our show, where we don't cover 2000s or 2010s films for the most part. We break the rules sometimes, but we were like, you know what? Let's talk about some Rob Zombie. So, it definitely went both ways there. But Eric, this is the part of the show where if you've got anything to plug, we usually have you do that. And I think you've got something to plug. We might have already plugged it a couple times.
Well, first of all, if you want to find me, you can find me on Twitter at UWEBOLLOCKS, like the director Uwe Boll, but with the bollocks at the end. So you could find
one of the few directors who has hate tweeted at our show once before. So
I think he called us, or I guess more specifically Josh, like a bitch motherfucker or something. It was awesome. It was hilarious.
Yeah, it was a great time because we covered covered House of the Dead with Resident Evil by Paul W.S. Anderson. I'm pretty sure pretty early on.
That's one of the things that I respect about that guy is his not just he'll just straight up. Well, I mean, he boxed people. He boxed critics, for Christ's sakes. Like he's a genuine madman.
We gotta get Josh in the ring, baby.
Yeah, I would get demolished in a second. I think he's been training his whole life.
Yeah, he's ready.
He found my Twitter account, and I thought that he was going to get shitty with me about it, but he is mostly okay because the name thing. I was like, is he going to be a dick about this? But he was mostly chill about it. So I was like, oh hey, I'm all right. I'm not going to have to box this guy.
There you go.
And then the other thing that I have is I have a podcast called Soundtracker where every week myself and a guest will look at a film that has an original motion picture soundtrack. Now, in doing it that way, it's just as much of a movie soundtrack as it is a music sound, or a movie podcast as it is a music podcast, because at the end of the day, you've got your big ones, Romeo and Juliet's and your Batman Forevers, but there are movies that I've covered on my show like Roadhouse or Major League, great movies that you might not have realized had original motion picture soundtracks. And that makes it, I think, more of an interactive thing because, you can, if it's a movie that you like, you can listen to that and see how we feel about the soundtrack. And it's kind of fun to dig into that. So it's not held to the parameter that it's got to be a huge movie soundtrack every week. It makes it very chaotic because from one week I could do Romeo and Juliet and the next week do Meet the Deedles or something like that. So it adds an interesting aspect to it. But I've had tons of fun guests on. Josh and Jamie were just on. I'm also in the midst of my Halloween run, and I've done The Craft, Blade, The Devil's Rejects, Scream, and then after this episode comes out will be The Fear, which is what I'm really hoping people tune into because it's probably the least known movie that I've done on the show so far, but it has a really great soundtrack. I've got Bakun as a guest, so check it out. You can find it wherever you listen to podcasts.
Friend of the pod, Bakun. Yeah. He's been on 2 or 3 times as well.
Yeah, he's great. I'm so excited to have him on, and you can follow along with the show on Twitter as well at Soundtracker with an underscore at the end. So check it out if you'd like. If you want, that's cool. I guess it's cool. Check it out.
Yeah, it's a great show. I checked out the Blade episode and it was awesome. So
thank you. Yeah,
highly recommend.
I appreciate it. And I'm just, it's really cool to see how this show has grown too in the time since I was first on. Like watching the way that this has grown as far as like your fan base and having, merch that you can get on anything, and that's great. It's really awesome to have seen that. So it's cool what you've done with this show.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Podcasters, we got to stick together.
That's right. That's right.
We're all NIGHTBREED now. We're all
the Unnaturals.
That's right.
God is a podcaster. Oz is over the moon.
Yes. But that being said, for our listeners, we're going to be back in 1 week's time with the very last episode of Spooktober, the big Halloween episode where we are going to be doing a non-franchise slasher double feature that I've had planned for years and haven't had a chance to slot it in yet. And we thought, what better time than an episode that's for the patrons exclusively, going up on Halloween weekend. So we're going to be talking about one film called Blood Rage, which was Jamie's hint about our boy Terry. That film's directed by John Grissmer. It is an absolute blast. It's actually one of the Halloween virtual watches we did in the first or second year of the show.
Yeah.
And it just brought the house down with the, we only had like 30 or 40 people watching with us, but we all had an absolute blast.
Terry's the coolest.
With just how, what a like domestic hysteria bloodbath with like a pulsing synth score to it. It's just a blast. And the pairing is a film from 1989 called Grave Robbers, which is actually a Mexican slasher film, which I have put in there because I don't think that we have covered much actual Mexican horror, and it kind of made sense because for me it's another one of the very underrated slashers of the 80s, and it's all about a satanic killer.
Ooh.
So yeah,
that Satan stuff.
it's pretty dirty and pretty gnarly, and in my opinion, better than like 95% of the Friday the 13th movies as a slasher. Yeah. So we're going to be talking about 2 slashers we think people should be putting more into their spooky season rotation for the Halloween episode next week over on Patreon, and then in 2 weeks' time. It's going to be the first episode of Noirvember, where we change gears and we move away from horror films and we talk exclusively about noir films, and we have a crazy lineup this year. But the first episode is we're going to be back with a special guest talking about 2 I haven't seen. We're going to be talking about Christmas Holiday and Cry of the City, which I believe are directed by Robert, I think it's Sionmark, and the guy who did The Killers. And I think we covered one of his films, Phantom Lady, which was a very, very good film, actually. Yeah. So, we're going to be talking about some noir. And I will say that that's episode 249. The episode after is 250.
That's crazy.
And I won't say what it is yet, but I have a huge noir double feature to celebrate 250 episodes. So look forward to that the week after.
Can I say one thing? That being said, though, oh, sorry.
Oh, of course.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
I want to say that Blood Rage is, if anyone listening, anyone that's listening to this has not seen Blood Rage, it is so fucking fun. Like just listening to you, and when you were talking about the pairing, I was trying to guess what it was going to be. Grave Robbers is great. When you said 1989, my brain immediately went to Intruder. And
yes,
that which I was looking up whether or not you've done that one on here yet, and I see that you have not. So if no one ever claims Intruders, next time you have me on, Intruders is going to be the one that I want to do, because Intruders is also a blast. But
because that's the one that has Sam Raimi in it, right? The Scott Spiegel one.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I know that one.
That's sick.
Hell yeah! But yeah, that's what you can expect over the next couple of weeks. I think that wraps it up for everything this week. Thanks so much for listening, and keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy.